Beneath a clay floor at Coatzacoalhuapa, an ancient city on Guatemala's Pacific Piedmont, excavators found vessels placed where no one was expected to retrieve them. Operation EB9 included parts of 2 patios and 2 compact sweat baths. Under the floors lay 21 cash deposits containing ceramic vessels, figurines, a mushroom stone, and unused obsidian blades. 11 large vessels had been covered with inverted bowls before the floor sealed them from ordinary sight. The deposits belong to the late Classic period, roughly 650 to 950 CE. Centuries later, researchers tested 7 vessels and found nicotine in 2 cylindrical vases and 1 spherical vessel. Each of those 3 vessels also contained an obsidian blade. The chemistry established that a nicotine-bearing substance had been present. It could not identify the recipe, the person who prepared it, the words spoken, or the act that followed. The vessel forms and sealed setting led researchers to propose a liquid tobacco preparation deposited as an offering. The nearby sweat baths make purification or curing plausible associations, though that connection remains an interpretation. This gap between detection and meaning is where our history begins. A history of smoking spaces could start with a coffee house, a club, or a furnished room carrying a brass plaque. Coatzacoalhuapa asks us to begin before any of those places existed. Here, a plant entered social space through preparation, concealment, placement, and a relationship between people and a building. The boundary was created through protocol. Across the Americas, indigenous peoples cultivated and gathered several tobacco species, and smoking was one practice among many. Tobacco could be chewed, powdered, snuffed, drunk, applied to the body, burned as an offering, placed with objects, or given as a gift. It could enter healing, prayer, mourning, diplomacy, feasting, hunting, hospitality, and ordinary social life. Practices differed by nation, region, role, age, knowledge, occasion, and place. So, at the beginning of this story, keep in mind that a space does not always need walls, as it can be formed by the order in which people sit, the person allowed to prepare a substance, the route of an object from hand to hand, or the obligation created by accepting a gift. The earliest known archaeological association between people and tobacco comes from the Wishbone site in Utah's Great Salt Lake Desert. Archaeologists recovered 4 charred seeds of wild tobacco beside a hearth dated to about 12,300 years ago. The discovery moved tobacco's documented human history deep into the Pleistocene, though it did not reveal how the plant was used. Tobacco seeds contain little nicotine, and they may have arrived with leaves or stems gathered for smoking, chewing, medicine, fuel, or another purpose. The evidence places tobacco near human activity without preserving a complete act. That caution becomes essential once tobacco is understood as a family of plants instead of one familiar leaf. The genus Nicotiana contains many species with different ranges, strengths, and histories of cultivation. Nicotiana tabacum later became the dominant commercial species, while Nicotiana rustica and other tobaccos remained important across the Americas. A nicotine trace can confirm tobacco in many cases, though it usually cannot identify the species or every ingredient in a mixture. Lowland South America makes this diversity especially clear. Pipes were common in the Chaco and parts of southern South America, while they were scarce across large areas of Amazonia. Historical accounts described rolled leaves, powders, chewed tobacco, thick pastes, liquid infusions, and smoke blown over people, objects, doorways, or cultivated areas. Ecology, trade, language, cultivation, and local cosmology shaped the form tobacco took. Later accounts show a range of possible practices, though they cannot be carried backward unchanged into an earlier century. preparation shaped the gathering long before anyone consumed the plant. Tobacco had to be cultivated or gathered, dried, cured, cut, pounded, mixed, stored, and carried. A powder, paste, drink, rolled leaf, or buried infusion required different tools, knowledge, recipients, and forms of labor. Dose and duration also created different sessions, from a quick offering to a prolonged session requiring supervision and recovery. Mesoamerican vessels preserve part of this hidden work. One late classic Maya flask in the Library of Congress bears a hieroglyphic phrase commonly translated as the House of Tobacco. Laboratory analysis found nicotine inside it, joining inscription and chemistry in a rare agreement. Yet the flask lacks a secure, excavated context, so it tells us more about its contents than the place or occasion of use. A later study of 14 Maya miniature flasks found tobacco markers in several vessels, with Mexican marigold appearing alongside tobacco in one of them. Ancient preparations could be mixtures, and a test searching only for nicotine may leave the rest of a recipe invisible. Cotzumalguapa adds a different scale because its nicotine-positive vessels were larger and resembled forms used for serving or drinking. 4 other vessels produced no nicotine, including a miniature bottle whose shape might have encouraged the opposite prediction. Form can suggest a use, though chemistry can overturn the label. At Feltus in Mississippi, nicotine appeared in ceramic pipe fragments from a mound complex used between about 400 and 1100 CE. The 4 mounds enclosed an open plaza, showing us once again that built social space did not require an enclosed room. And in Alabama's Flint River region, a smoking tube dated to roughly 1685 to 1530 BCE produced a nicotine signal supported by its form and wear. And in the inland Pacific Northwest, people smoked plants for more than 4,500 years, while some pipes held tobacco and others held sumac, red osier dogwood, sage, or mixtures. Pipes held several plants, and tobacco appeared in several forms beyond pipes. The Caribbean record carries another imbalance. European witnesses adopted a Taino-derived word, while colonization, disease, enslavement, displacement, and destruction narrowed the indigenous archive. The familiar scene of Europeans discovering smoke can overwhelm the agricultural knowledge, objects, language, and protocols that made the encounter possible. A pipe in a museum case can look like a complete object. In use, it joined a bowl, stem, plant material, fire, tools, containers, and people. Stone and ceramic bowls often survived after wooden stems disappeared. Longer stems made lighting, preparation, and assistance more visible, and the person who lit the pipe could hold a role different from the person who received it. This assembled quality gave the pipe social power. Preparation could delay speech, focus attention, and mark the person entitled to begin. Passing could establish an order, while acceptance might acknowledge hospitality, open discussion, or confirm an obligation. The root of the object translated relationships into movement. In the eastern woodlands, pipes help archaeologists study exchange, identity, diplomacy, and ceremonial life. Late 15th and early 16th century effigy pipes carried related imagery across St. Lawrence Iroquoian sites and Mohawk, Oneida, and Onondaga communities. The shared forms suggest communication during political strain and alliance-making, while the exact political relationship remains uncertain. St. Lawrence Iroquoians had their own communities and histories, separate from the later Haudenosaunee Confederacy. European observers often used the French word calumet for different pipes and ceremonies, while later English writers compressed them into the phrase peace pipe. That broad label hides war councils, mourning, adoption, healing, trade, hospitality, diplomacy, and sacred relationships. A pipe could authorize negotiation without guaranteeing peace. Its force came from the demands recognized by the participants. Silence could be part of that choreography as people watched the keeper, the fire, or the person receiving the stem. The same object could enter hospitality, healing, counsel, or communication with sacred beings, though those purposes remained distinct. A healer might burn, apply, blow, or administer tobacco under rules of training and community authority. A host might offer it with food, drink, gifts, and speech, while a council might use circulation to make speaking order and belonging visible. Present-day indigenous guidance continues to distinguish traditional or sacred tobacco from commercial tobacco. Practices vary among nations, as some nations do not use tobacco this way, and specific people may hold responsibility for growing, preparing, carrying, or offering it. Living traditions continue as contemporary systems of knowledge and governance, and they exist beyond the needs of archaeological interpretation. The familiar image of a long-stemmed ceremonial pipe also needs local names and local histories. Similar forms can belong to different nations, societies, owners, bundles, and occasions, and some objects require consent before public display or detailed description. Colonial records often made counsel appear more exclusively male than the wider evidence allows. Observers entered men's political meetings while missing women's roles in cultivation, preparation, hospitality, clan authority, decision-making, and gender-specific practices. Stone pipes appear in the southern plateau by about 1250 CE, while later observers described pipes passing before speeches among some interior Salish communities. Along parts of the coast, pipe smoking was limited, while Haida and Tlingit communities cultivated or chewed tobacco. One recorded Tlingit feast described tobacco offered through fire to deceased members of the hosting clan as songs and histories were recalled. That account belongs to a specific setting, though it shows how fire could carry an offering and gather the living around obligations to ancestors. The red pipestone quarries of present-day southwestern Minnesota show that a pipe's social world could begin far from the gathering. The place is sacred to many peoples, each with its own stories and protocols, and the Ihangtanwan Oyate hold a particular treaty relationship to it. So a finished bowl may fit in one hand, though it carries a quarry, tools, teaching, travel, and sustained labor within it. The archaeological record begins with what survives. Stone, ceramic, charred seeds, dental plaque, and absorbed residues can last, while leaves, wooden stems, woven bags, and smoke often disappear. The archive, therefore, exaggerates durable technologies before excavation even begins. Context gives an object its first grammar. A pipe fragment from a sealed floor differs from one collected loose on the surface, and a vessel excavated beside a sweat bath carries more spatial history than a flask purchased without provenance. Chemistry adds specificity, though every result depends on sampling, contamination control, reference material, and the survival of molecules. A positive nicotine result supports the presence of tobacco without necessarily revealing the species, dose, recipe, route of consumption, or social purpose. A negative result also has limits because cleaning, heat, water, soil chemistry, storage, and time can remove residues. Sampling may consume part of an object, which makes scientific permission inseparable from cultural authority when sacred or sensitive material is involved. Written sources preserve actions that chemistry cannot, though they also preserve the observer's position and purpose. European missionaries, traders, soldiers, and officials translated tobacco through Christian theology, medicine, commerce, and colonial rule. Their descriptions can be detailed and interesting at the same time. Museum catalogs add another layer of distance, since a precise number can sit beside a vague community label, uncertain date, or history of coercive collection. And while digital access makes an image easy to copy, technical access does not settle cultural permission. In the United States, for instance, the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act of 1990 created processes for returning human remains, funerary objects, sacred objects, and objects of cultural patrimony. Regulations that took effect in 2024 strengthened the duty of care and the role of indigenous knowledge. Repatriation changes who holds authority to decide how an object is cared for, described, displayed, photographed, or returned to active use. Oral history and living knowledge require the same respect, since permission to share a teaching for one purpose does not grant permission to publish every detail. Some silences protect relationships, and responsible history must know when to stop. The whole event emerges when different sources correct one another. Chemistry can identify tobacco, archaeology can establish context, written accounts can preserve vanished actions, and community knowledge can correct a label or translation. Each source becomes stronger when another source tests its limits. Tobacco sociability begins in many places, separated by date, technology, and social purpose. A beginning may be a hearth, a cache, a healing session, a council, a feast, or a portable bundle. Before commerce, tobacco already had growers, makers, hosts, keepers, recipients, and rules. It could call people into relation without creating a permanent institution. The modern cigar lounge belongs to a separate history. For now. The distance between a Coatzumalhuapa cache and a commercial smoking room is historical, cultural, and moral. Their connection lies in one surviving question. What arrangement of bodies, objects, authority, and access gives tobacco its social meaning? Later rooms will answer through prices, property, service, gendered doors, ventilation, and law. Meanwhile, the next transformation came through water. European sailors, merchants, soldiers, missionaries, settlers, and enslavers carried tobacco plants, products, pipes, and partial understandings into Atlantic routes. As such, ports, ships, plantations, taverns, and courts would attach commerce, coercion, adaptation, and empire to the spaces tobacco created. Protocol had made a place before commerce, and across the Atlantic, movement and profit would decide who controlled the leaf, who served, and who was allowed to enter the room. In January 1708, English privateers stopped the French ship Fidelité de Dieppe and searched what remained of her Atlantic cargo. Inside the hold were 8 half-barrels of clay tobacco pipes. A similar seizure the previous year had found 4 half-barrels aboard La Conquérante. The pipes were cheap, fragile, and packed in numbers large enough to survive breakage, resale, and daily use. A bowl that would later fit in one hand first crossed the ocean as part of a barrel. It entered the historical record because war brought a clerk into the hold. The inventory could count pipes, though it could not name the people who eventually used them. Some may have gone to sailors, port shops, taverns, plantations, African markets, royal courts, or captive people aboard slave ships. The same object could mark a sailor's pause, a planter's authority, an enslaved worker's privately claimed interval, or a courtier's place near a king. The roots connected these people without making their positions equal. And across the water, indigenous knowledge was appropriated, altered, and often presented by Europeans as a discovery awaiting commercial improvement. Leaves traveled bundled, twisted, rolled, pressed, and packed into casks or large wooden hogsheads. So these pipes moved beside ceramics, cloth, weapons, beads, food, and human beings forced into ships. And ports turned these things into entries in an account. Customs officers counted them, factors priced them, dock workers lifted them, and sailors guarded, traded, stole, or consumed them. Anyhow, a wooden ship depended on fire and remained constantly threatened by it. Cooking, lighting, heating, repairs, weapons, and signals required flame, while one ember could reach sailcloth, cordage, bedding, timber, powder, or dry cargo. As such, smoking depended on location, timing, and command. Captains could restrict pipes to exposed parts of the deck or an authorized light. So some crews turned to chewing or snuff when an open flame seemed too dangerous. As for officers, they had cabins and greater control over private time, while ordinary seamen slept and worked in crowded areas that changed with the watch. So yes, the pipe could be common, yet the right to light it remained controlled. Ports and ships also became practical schools of tobacco use. Sailors, pilots, interpreters, soldiers, merchants, and colonists watched how leaves were dried, rolled, lit, inhaled, or held. European makers adapted pipes to local clay and workshop methods. White ball clay could be molded into light, inexpensive wares with increasingly long and easily broken stems. And by the later 17th century, Gouda had become a major center. Its pipe trade grew from about 80 guild members in 1665 to more than 600 by 1730. Behind each disposable pipe stood potters, finishers, packers, carters, merchants, dockworkers, sailors, porters, customs officers, and retailers. For instance, Jamestown shows how imported manufacture met local material and indigenous precedent. Robert Cotton arrived in 1608 and was listed as a tobacco pipe maker. Archaeologists have recovered locally made red clay pipes with European decorative stamps, along with forms closer to Algonquian examples. And while no fragment can be assigned confidently to Cotton's hand, the assemblage still reveals a colonial workshop operating inside a cultural world already shaped by indigenous technologies. Then there's Port Royal in Jamaica, which offers a far larger record. Excavations recovered 21,575 kaolin clay pipes from deposits sealed by the earthquake of 1692. Many were connected through makers' marks to English workshops, including Bristol. The number reflects commerce, use, and breakage in a waterfront town of merchants, sailors, soldiers, artisans, enslaved people, sex workers, and tavern keepers. It does not, however, turn every fragment into a pirate's pipe. In other words, a maker's mark can identify manufacture, though it cannot supply the smoker's biography. The most violent shipboard setting was the slave vessel. You see, what happened was, captive Africans were stripped of possessions, separated, confined, and subjected to organized surveillance and force. And since pipes and tobacco aboard these ships were usually controlled by traders and officers. During the late 17th and 18th centuries, some British, French, Danish, and Dutch voyages issued them to adult captives. A Royal African Company estimate for 200 people included tobacco and 5 gross of pipes. The Danish slave ship Fredensborg distributed them weekly in 1768. These practices varied by ship and never formed a universal ration. Traders believed limited movement, food, music, games, dancing, or tobacco might reduce resistance and preserve the sale value of the people they treated as cargo. The brief interval created by a pipe existed inside coercion. Captive people could still give it meanings beyond an officer's understanding, though the surviving records rarely preserve those acts. However, fire made the policy unstable. One French captain advised grated tobacco without pipes because flame threatened the vessel. Other captains issued pipes anyway. When sailors stepped ashore, lodging houses, chandlers, shops, and waterfront inns extended the port into an interior. A seaman could find food, a bed, news, credit, a future berth, tobacco, tinder, or a replacement pipe. And farther inland, the Virginia Ordinary stood where roads, rivers, courts, markets, and political sessions produced travelers. It might offer lodging, drink, food, stabling, meetings, entertainment, business, news, and tobacco. Smoke occupied the tap room, chamber, porch, yard, doorway, or hearth without requiring a dedicated room. Many Virginia taverns were timber buildings with a tap room or bar on the first floor. Detached kitchens reduced heat and some fire risk while moving much of the labor out of the customer's view. County justices licensed ordinary keepers and set rates for food, drink, lodging, and horse feed. Women such as Christiana Campbell and Jane Vobe ran prominent Williamsburg establishments during the 18th century. Campbell's business also depended on enslaved people who cooked, cleaned, carried water, tended fires, washed linen, served tables, and cared for horses. Smoke added ash, broken stems, spittle, odor, and the constant need for a light. So at the end of the day, the welcoming room was produced through labor that elite visitors rarely named. Tobacco connected the tavern to the plantation even when no hogshead stood near the table. In Virginia, public dues, wages, rents, debts, and purchases could be reckoned in pounds of leaf. A meal or night's lodging could be paid through a commodity grown on appropriated land and produced through bound labor. Barbados, on the other hand, developed along another path. You see, English settlers established a permanent colony in 1627 and first planted tobacco beside cotton and other crops. Sugar soon transformed landholding, labor demand, capital, and the built environment. Tobacco remained in use after losing its early position as a leading export. A planter's pipe could accompany command or sociability, while an enslaved person's pipe could enter rest, exchange, healing, mourning, memory, or another relationship beyond the owner's control. Managers sometimes distributed tobacco and European clay pipes as incentives tied to labor discipline. Enslaved people also grew tobacco on provision plots, bought or bartered for it in markets, reused broken pipes, and obtained locally made forms. The Newton Plantation Cemetery in Barbados shows how far that meaning could travel. Excavations in 1972 and 1973 found 22 complete clay pipes associated with 18 of 92 burials. Most were English white clay pipes. African diasporic communities placed them as grave goods, turning cheap colonial commodities into objects within relationships with the dead. One pipe differed in clay, manufacture, form, and decoration, and was interpreted as West African. It accompanied an older man buried in the late 17th or early 18th century with metal ornaments, beads, cowries, animal remains, a knife, and a carnelian bead from India. Earlier scholars propose that he may have been a healer or diviner. The assemblage supports that possibility without recovering his exact role. It also cannot prove that the distinctive pipe traveled with him across the Middle Passage. But the strongest evidence lies in the burial decision itself. English pipes, European glass, Indian stone, African forms, and Caribbean plantation life were brought together by a community assigning new meaning to the dead. As such, cultural continuity survived through memory, skill, language, bodily practice, and social rebuilding as much as through possessions. African courts, markets, households, and workshops also changed tobacco and its equipment. In March 1693, the German traveler Johann Peter Oettinger disembarked at Ouidah, which was also known as Glehue, in the kingdom of Oueda on the coast of present-day Benin. He entered a political world already connected to regional trade, Atlantic shipping, royal ceremony, and religious authority. A Chinese porcelain spittoon associated with kingship reveals how far an object could travel before entering local service. At the courts of Oueda and later Dahomey, such a vessel could appear near the monarch in public or semi-public ceremony. Its force came from royal placement, regional ideas of bodily display and cleanliness, and connections with Vodun. Someone had to obtain it, carry it, position it, empty it, clean it, and know when it should appear. Dahomey's conquest of Oueda in the 1720s changed political control while engagement with imported goods continued. European travelers described these courts through commercial interests and assumptions about African difference. Their accounts can preserve material detail while distorting the authority and order behind it. The Kingdom of Congo, on the other hand, offers a different record. The Congo King Project recovered more than 1,000 fragments of terracotta and stone pipes from Mbanza, Congo, Ngongo Mbata, Kindoki, Kinlongo, and other sites. The sequence begins in the late 16th or early 17th century and continues into the 19th. The first known written testimony identified by the project comes from Samuel Brune's visit to Mbanza Soyo in 1612. Later observers describe smoking among men and women, with long pipes associated with nobles moving through streets, attending church, or traveling in hammocks. Now, the first written mention cannot establish the first use, though it supports a rapid and visible adoption. Congo potters used local clay, familiar skills, detachable stems, geometric decoration, and several regional forms. Stone pipes demanded specialist labor and long-distance material. At Ngongo Mbata and Kinlongo, unfinished pieces and hundreds of serpentinite fragments suggest production linked to Mbata province and its elite. The raw stone probably came from the Mayombe region. Shaping, drilling, polishing, and transport turned the pipe into a sign of access to labor and political position. 7 stone pipe fragments from the Lumbu site in Mbanza, Congo, came from a quarter associated with the king's public decision-making court. They may record the presence of the Mwene Mbata or nobles linked to his province, though the evidence cannot identify an individual smoker. Clay versions copied the color or form of expensive stone pipes and allowed a prestige design to circulate in a more accessible material. Congo artisans controlled that translation. Illustrations published by Girolamo Merola da Sorrento, who lived in Congo between 1683 and 1688, show nobles with long pipes. Placed beside excavated pipes, they support a link among long stems, elite display, movement, service, and gendered court life. A noble carried in a hammock while smoking depended on bearers, an ember, and perhaps a pipe attendant. Visible leisure rested on organized labor. Congo's churches, markets, royal quarters, roads, and noble residences belonged to a Christianized African polity with generations of Atlantic diplomacy and commerce. And so tobacco entered an established cosmopolitan system and expressed internal provincial authority as much as contact with Europe. No single African tobacco history can be built from Congo, Hueta, or Dahomey. Reports from 1607 describe cultivation and pipe smoking in parts of Sierra Leone and Liberia. You see, in around 1620 to 1621, Richard Jobson described people along the Gambia smoking tobacco imported from Brazil. Furthermore, at Elmina on the Gold Coast, imported English and Dutch pipes appeared beside locally made examples within a town shaped by African commerce, European garrison life, households, markets, and the slave trade. A pipe from such a site needs a precise context before anyone assigns it to a soldier, merchant, resident, captive, worker, or visitor. And since the Atlantic carried routes, pressure, commodities, and violence, communities supplied the social grammar through cultivation, craft, memory, worship, hospitality, political display, and refusal. The next crossing leads into Ottoman, Arab, and Persian coffeehouse systems. There, tobacco joined established rituals of coffee service, storytelling, games, performance, gardens, surveillance, and urban public life. Ships had already shown how movement could create disciplined social worlds. The coffeehouse would give those worlds a more permanent interior. In the autumn of 1582, Istanbul's coffee sellers carried an entire coffeehouse past the Sultan. Their contribution to the circumcision festival of Prince Mehmed was a wooden room mounted on wheels. Court artists recorded it in the Surname-e-Humayun, the illustrated festival book associated with Nakash Osman and his workshop. Inside the frame, men sat on carpets while servers passed blue and white cups. Chess and mancala boards occupied the floor, a furnace marked the working center, and performers held part of the crowd's attention. 45 figures filled the painted room so densely that the coffeehouse seemed like a piece of city life placed under imperial inspection. The miniature was a courtly performance instead of a neutral view of an ordinary afternoon. Its customers appeared orderly, sociable, and safely entertaining while the Sultan remained outside and the premises moved beneath his gaze. Yet, the image captured something real. By 1582, coffeehouses had become visible parts of Istanbul's civic life. They gathered men of different trades, ranks, habits, and levels of education. They were also watched, licensed, closed, reopened, and feared by officials who understood what could happen when customers stayed together after the cup was empty. And tobacco is absent from the scene. But that absence fixes the order of this chapter. You see, the coffeehouse existed before the long pipe became one of its defining objects. Coffee had already created a routine of preparation, service, waiting, conversation, gaming, listening, and return. Proprietors maintained the furnace and utensils. Assistants carried cups, fetched water, and managed regular customers. Storytellers, poets, musicians, puppeteers, dervishes, soldiers, tradesmen, travelers, and officials entered a commercial room whose social use had grown larger than the drink. And when tobacco spread through Ottoman and Iranian cities around the opening of the 17th century, it entered an institution that already knew how to seat people and hold their attention. The familiar account of Istanbul's first coffee houses comes from the 17th century historian Ibrahim Peçevi. He wrote that merchants from Aleppo and Damascus opened premises in Tahtakale during the reign of Suleiman I, usually dated to the early 1550s. Peçevi wrote decades later, so the story works better as a remembered origin. It places the institution in a market district near docks, warehouses, caravans, and workshops. Men came to Tahtakale to trade, carry goods, petition, worship, negotiate, and wait. So the coffeehouse gave movement a pause. A merchant could meet a contact, an artisan could leave the workshop, and a traveler could hear local news. Later, coffeehouses ranged from narrow rooms with open fronts to large establishments with platforms, fountains, performers, and gardens. The open frontage placed customers in view of the street. Passers-by could hear a storyteller or recognize a patron before deciding to enter. Servers crossed the threshold with trays and cups. The activity advertised the business while exposing customers to neighbors, creditors, rivals, police, and informants. Regulars returned to familiar places and sat beside familiar companions. A seat near the furnace or on a raised platform could become valuable because everyone knew who usually occupied it. And so tobacco added a new claim on space after about 1600. The Ottoman chibuk joined a clay bowl, a long wooden or reed stem, and a mouthpiece that might be made from amber, coral, ivory, stone, or a simpler material. Each pipe needed packed tobacco, a live coal, cleaning, safe ash disposal, and protection from breakage. Once lit, the stem extended the smoker's body across a bench, carpet, or platform. An attendant could bring the prepared bowl, present the mouthpiece, and adjust the ember with tongs. Some customers carried personal pipes or mouthpieces, while others relied on the establishment. The coffeehouse, however, became a workshop for controlled fire, and Tofane, on the Bosphorus, became famous for specialized clay pipe bowls. Other crafts supplied jasmine, cherry, reed, and wooden stems, along with amber and stone mouthpieces. The smoker who appeared idle held the work of clay makers, drillers, carvers, finishers, sellers, fuel workers, and servers. That labor had practical urgency in a city repeatedly damaged by fire. After all, coffeehouses depended on furnaces, braziers, lamps, and tobacco embers within dense timber neighborhoods. Officials could close premises in the name of order or safety. And daily prevention still depended on hearth placement, water, ash disposal, and workers watching the flame. Conversation was one attraction among many. Chess, mancala, backgammon, reading, satire, music, puppetry, and observation could hold a customer through a long visit. The chibuk suited that setting because it could rest between moves while an ember was tended. Then there's storytelling, which rearranged the room more completely. The medda used voice, gesture, mimicry, a cane, and a handkerchief to move between characters. Customers turned from their usual circles and became an audience, while servers continued moving at the edges. The room became a theater without gaining the silence of one. Listeners could arrive late, whisper, cough, leave, or order another cup. Shadow theater created another temporary stage. A lit screen concealed the puppeteer and projected Karagos and other comic figures toward the crowd. Urban accents, trades, reputations, and tensions became material for satire. The coffeehouse made mockery commercially useful, though a joke about the wrong official or religious figure could become dangerous. This capacity to hold audiences made coffeehouses politically visible before any conversation became openly seditious. You see, officials saw people sharing news and loyalty beyond household and workplace supervision. So, preachers attacked idleness, gambling, and suspect entertainment, while rulers imposed closures during periods of anxiety. The rooms returned because they met durable urban needs, while customers entered them for many different reasons. By the 18th century, some Istanbul premises were associated with Janissary regiments and their wider networks. A Janissary coffeehouse could display insignia, attract a recognized clientele, arrange credit or protection, and turn loyalty into a daily habit. So story listening strengthened those ties. Between about 1780 and 1830, tales of the early Islamic hero Abu Muslim circulated among listeners connected to Janissary and Bektashi identities. One manuscript records a reading in 1808 or 1809 at Mehmed Agha's coffeehouse in Cheshme Medina in Galata. The page fixes a named story to a named premises and an audience whose attachments gave the narrative political force. The destruction of the Janissary Corps in 1826 brought plenty of closures, confiscations, and danger to visible symbols. Istanbul's coffee houses, however, survived by changing clientele, decoration, performance, and political language. The coffeehouse network grew through many cities without following a finished imperial model from Istanbul. Aleppo and Damascus already appeared in Ottoman memory as sources of the institution, while Cairo had developed its own coffee culture by the 16th century. Each city joined coffee to local markets, religious calendars, trade routes, performance, and climate. An English traveler visiting Aleppo around 1600 described coffee houses as more common than alehouses in England and noticed benches along the street. His silence on tobacco is useful because the room was established before smoking dominated later descriptions. And by the 18th century, Alexander and Patrick Russell described Aleppo coffee houses in every quarter. Some were large, painted, and lined with platforms or benches, while better premises contained fountains and galleries for musicians. Wide windows opened the interior, while stools moved outside in warm weather. Aleppo's caravan routes brought merchants from Anatolia, Syria, Iraq, Iran, the Mediterranean, and desert routes. A neighborhood premises could become trans-regional for the length of one conversation. Tobacco service sometimes arrived through itinerant specialists. The Russells described men carrying lighted water pipes to coffee houses and supplying customers. One worker could provide the apparatus, charcoal, tobacco, and skill while the coffee house supplied the seat and drink. And in Cairo, small street premises often used mastabas, raised masonry benches at an open frontage. Edward William Lane's account from the 1830s described reciters seated near the doorway, while listeners occupied facing benches and stools. Most held pipes, and some held coffee. The proprietor paid the performer because the story attracted customers. The doorway became a stage that reached the street. Long narrative cycles gave people with different levels of literacy a shared store of heroes and episodes. And as for Ramadan, that time of the year changed the hours. After sunset, coffee houses filled, lamps burned, and reciters or musicians could perform through the night. Some men broke the fast with coffee and a pipe. And although the scene belongs to 19th century Cairo, it still shows how religious time could reorder service, labor, wakefulness, and company. Lane also recorded class distinctions among water pipes. Glass-based shishes and elaborate narghiles appeared among wealthier users, while the simpler goze was associated with poorer smokers. The customer displayed materials and comfort, while the attendant handled heat, ash, water, cleaning, and failure. Damascus, on the other hand, expanded coffee and tobacco sociability into gardens beside the Barada and its channels. Shade, water, paths, platforms, ownership, and access turned the landscape into a serviced room. Damascus was also a craft center for pipe bowls, stems, fittings, and mouthpieces. Jerusalem and caravan sites preserve a more fragmentary history through clay pipe assemblages. Their forms and maker's marks help date deposits and trace circulation, though a fragment cannot identify the smoker or prove that a coffee house occupied the spot. Taken together, The finds show how quickly pipe use became ordinary across routes used by residents, merchants, soldiers, pilgrims, and workers. Then we have Safavid Isfahan. That city placed the coffee house within royal urban design. When Shah Abbas I reshaped the city around Naqshi Jahan Square and the Chaharbagh, he joined palaces, mosques, bazaars, gardens, bridges, caravan routes, and promenades in one ordered landscape. Coffee houses appeared along these routes during the late 16th and early 17th centuries. And along the Chaharbagh, service extended toward water channels, trees, gardens, and evening crowds. Around Naqshi Jahan Square, coffee houses stood near the palace, mosque, bazaar, ceremony, and royal observation. Some premises used broad platforms, side alcoves, and a central pool or fountain. The main area allowed performance and circulation, while alcoves gave smaller groups partial separation. Coffee reached Isfahan through Indian Ocean Gulf and caravan routes. Tobacco followed soon after the coffee house had taken root. The Persian kalian suited a service culture built around seated patrons. Its head, stem, water vessel, tube, seals, charcoal, and prepared tobacco formed a complex apparatus. Materials ranged from plain pottery and wood to glass, metal, coconut shell, painted surfaces, and costly fittings. A servant washed or moistened the tobacco, filled the vessel, packed the head, lit charcoal, tested the draw, adjusted heat, guarded textiles from ash, and cleaned the apparatus. The customer received the finished experience after its difficulty had been transferred to other hands. At court, that distance expressed rank, as paintings and travel accounts show attendants presenting coffee, fruit, cups, and kalyans to seated men. In an urban coffee house, staff prepared several pipes and moved among customers as hoses crossed pathways and vessels occupied the floor. The kalyan, however, encouraged stable seating because moving it risked water, ash, and breakage. Shah Abbas used coffee houses as places of managed approach. Accounts describe him visiting premises, hearing poets, speaking with customers, and observing public life. His presence changed the room. Guards, officials, preparation, and unequal attention followed him inside. The coffee house allowed the ruler to perform accessibility while extending the court's gaze into the city. Storytelling gave the Persian kahve khane its most enduring performance identity. The naqal used voice, movement, gesture, and sometimes a painted scroll to narrate the Shahnameh, tales of Hamza, religious narratives, romances, and local histories. Listeners knew famous episodes and judged the teller's choices. A kalyan ember could be refreshed during a pause before combat or catastrophe. Later, coffeehouse painting placed heroic and religious scenes on the walls, especially during the late 19th and 20th centuries. The fall of the Safavid dynasty in 1722 disrupted Isfahan's court economy and long-distance consumption. Coffee became less dependable as trade and political conditions changed. Fortunately, the kahve khane survived. And by the Qajar period, tea had become the common drink in many establishments, while the old name remained. So, a room created for coffee could serve tea, kalyan, story, news, craft sociability, and neighborhood memory. Its identity had grown larger than its first commodity. Across Istanbul, Cairo, Aleppo, Damascus, Jerusalem, and Isfahan, tobacco entered rooms that already possessed hearths, seats, regulars, performers, reputations, and systems of service. And as you can imagine, pipes increased the need for charcoal, cleaning, storage, ash control, and skilled attention. They changed posture and duration, and they made a customer's occupation of the seat easier to see. Publicness meant visibility before it meant freedom. These rooms widened access to news, entertainment, and company while preserving male privilege, class distinction, military patronage, service hierarchy, and state surveillance. Women remained largely outside the standard street coffeehouse in the surviving record, though they consumed coffee and tobacco in households, palaces, bath-related gatherings, gardens, and forms of reception that male observers rarely entered. Yet, no single coffeehouse model explains this geography. Istanbul's Çubuk and Janissary affiliations differed from Cairo's Ramadan recitations. Aleppo's itinerant pipe attendants differed from Damascus garden service. Isfahan's Kalyan and Royal Promenade belonged to another political and material world. The connection lies in the institution's ability to receive a new substance and train it through local labor, architecture, performance, and rank. So, tobacco rarely arrived in an empty room. And now, the next movement carries us farther east. Mughal courts, Chinese tea houses and shops, Japanese tobacco trays, inns, clubs, and Southeast Asian settings would organize smoke through other architectures and portable objects. Near the end of the 18th century, dinner in Calcutta continued after the dishes were cleared. In Louis de Grandpré account, each European guest had a hookah-bardar preparing his pipe in an adjoining room. The attendants entered with dessert and arranged water vessels, hoses, mouthpieces, bowls, and charcoal behind the diners. Water began to gurgle, servants called across the room, and ordinary conversation briefly gave way to confusion. Smoke filled the air until the far side of the apartment became difficult to see. A guest without a hookah occupied an awkward position because the apparatus had become part of belonging at the table. Grandpré wrote as a French visitor describing British society in Bengal, and his comic tone turned Indian servants into part of the spectacle. Yet his account preserved the structure beneath the scene. The diner received a cooled, fragrant draw after someone else had selected the tobacco, cleaned the vessel, filled the water chamber, prepared the head, carried live coals, tested the seal, and protected the carpet. As for the adjoining room, it absorbed heat, ash, water, and disorder before the hookah entered as a controlled gesture of leisure. The hookah-bardar was the person who made the room work. A jeweled hookah base, a Chinese water pipe, a Japanese kiseru, or an early kretek packet may survive as a beautiful object. In use, each one belonged to a system of preparation, service, posture, waste, and social access. The regions shared trade routes and colonial pressures, though they developed distinct smoking practices. Around 1604 or 1605, the Mughal court official Asad Beg encountered tobacco at Bijapur and carried it north. He described presenting Akbar with a handsome pipe, a golden burner, and a box of tobacco. The emperor examined the apparatus, drew smoke briefly, and consulted his physician. Other nobles sought portions, merchants began selling the leaf, and the practice spread quickly. The account gives a strong date for court encounter and commercial acceleration. It establishes a court encounter while leaving the first Indian smoker and the invention of the water pipe unresolved. Later tradition credited Akbar's physician, Hakim Abul Fath Gilani, with passing smoke through water to cool or purify it. The chronology and the wider Iranian evidence make that neat invention story difficult to prove, as Mughal India was still a major site of adaptation. Imported tobacco met local vessel making, metalwork, glass, coconut shell, court etiquette, and domestic service. The hookah, rendered in English as hookah, could include a water base, vertical tube, tobacco head, hose, mouthpiece, and airtight seals. Its materials ranged from earthenware and coconut shell to glass, jade, metal, enamel, carved wood, and precious fittings. Water made the apparatus appear self-contained, though its operation depended on tobacco preparation, fuel, cleaning, safe placement, and constant attention. A long hose let the smoker recline while the hothead and water base remained at a distance. That graceful curve also marked the separation between leisure and labor. Court paintings made the hierarchy visible. A painting of Maharaja Medini Pal from around 1730 to 1735 shows the ruler seated on a garden terrace while a young attendant tends the hookah and holds pan. There's also a Punjab Hills drawing from around 1790, which shows an elite woman reaching toward a hookah in a controlled domestic or garden setting. These images support the presence of women within some elite smoking cultures, though they cannot describe women across India. The hookah-bardar, nevertheless, turned the apparatus into a repeatable service. He needed to know the smoker's preferred tobacco, moisture, strength, vessel, mouthpiece, timing, and social routine. A poor draw reflected on his work, while live coal carried through textiles and crowded rooms created constant risk. Mouthpieces could be detached, cleaned, exchanged, or reserved for individuals. Rules of caste, religion, kinship, status, and bodily contact could make sharing a sign of intimacy in one household and an unacceptable act in another. British residents adopted this South Asian apparatus while expanding colonial power. The hookah could display long residence and local fluency, yet that familiarity increased dependence on Indian servants and markets. Bungalows divided the work among dining rooms, verandas, courtyards, service passages, cookhouses, and adjoining apartments. Cantonments tied officers' leisure to civilian servants and bazaars located beside the institutions of military force. Clubs then began to harden the racial threshold. Some early premises retained hookahs, while others preferred cigars, cheroots, pipes, and later cigarettes associated with British masculinity. By the 1830s, hookah use had declined sharply among many British residents. Political conquest, evangelical reform, and changing domestic codes recast the apparatus as indolent, effeminate, unhygienic, or un-English. So, the work remained. Club staff continued to supply tobacco, lights, drinks, ash receptacles, cleaning, and ventilation, though the service became less visible. And the conspicuous hookah-bardar gave way to assistants designed to feel ambient. Tobacco reached China during the late Ming through several connected routes. Maritime traffic carried it from the Philippines and other Southeast Asian ports into Fujian and the southeast coast. Overland movement and military circulation brought seed, leaf, and smoking practices through borderlands. The evidence we have supports several entries, followed by rapid domestication. Farmers selected varieties for local soils. Physicians placed the plant within ideas about cold, damp, circulation, digestion, and bodily balance. Artisans developed regional pipes while retailers cut, blended, weighed, and packaged leaf for recognized uses. Early prohibitions reveal how visible tobacco had become. As with other historical examples we mentioned earlier, authorities there also worried about fire, military discipline, farmland, morality, and unstable frontiers. Cultivation and trade were already too dispersed for court orders to produce simple obedience. Long dry pipes became common across social levels. Many joined a small metal or ceramic bowl to a bamboo, wood, or reed stem. The stem cooled smoke through distance, yet it also demanded room to lift, rest, pass, and store the pipe safely. Lamps, coals, ash containers, racks, and cleaning tools completed the setting. Portable water pipes compressed more equipment into a metal body. 19th century examples could combine a bowl, water chamber, draw tube, tobacco container, tweezers, and cleaning tools in one upright object. Enamel, engraved brass, white metal, and cloisonné made some of them valuable personal possessions. Museum labels sometimes assign these vessels to tobacco, opium, or an uncertain mixture of uses. That uncertainty requires object-level evidence. After all, prepared opium depended on a lamp, specialized bowl, needle, repeated heating, and a reclining posture. Tobacco used leaf, a different bowl, and a shorter lighting sequence that could take place upright at a tea house table. The substances overlapped in some districts and buildings, though their equipment and tempo remained distinct. Tobacco shops, on the other hand, formed their own public threshold. Customers judged aroma, moisture, cut, strength, region, and price, while a shopkeeper handled leaf, worked at a cutting board, weighed portions, or fitted a replacement stem. An open counter supported a brief purchase. A stool and credit account could turn the same transaction into a longer relationship. As for tea houses, they gave tobacco an established architecture of tables, benches, kettles, street openings, performance, bargaining, arbitration, and prolonged occupancy. Their forms differed across Beijing, Chengdu, Hankou, Shanghai, treaty ports, county towns, and market villages. Some contained opera or storytelling. Others served merchants, craftsmen, neighborhood groups, or travelers. Late Qing Chengdu became especially crowded with tea houses, which appeared near markets, temples, bridges, guild halls, and busy streets. A repeated count lists 454 tea houses among 516 streets and lanes. So, smoking fitted the long stay. A venue might supply a durable pipe while the customer purchased tobacco and temporary use. Staff filled water, packed small bowls, wiped mouthpieces, cleared residue, replaced parts, and managed flame beside hot kettles and crowded furniture. Dry pipe smokers could bring their own apparatus and rely on the premises for safe lighting and ash disposal. Homes, inns, restaurants, theaters, guild halls, and tea houses therefore created different tobacco publics. As for women, they smoked in some elite, rural, working, and domestic settings, while local moral codes condemned the practice elsewhere. Regional evidence holds more weight here than a single category of Chinese custom. Snuff, dry pipes, water pipes, cigars, and cigarettes could also coexist within one household or generation. By the early 20th century, factory-made cigarettes began reducing the need for venue-owned pipes, repair, and specialist cleaning. A packet and match shifted value toward industrial production and printed identity. Pipe use, however, remained familiar and inexpensive for many consumers, so the older system continued beside the new one. Japan, on the other hand, developed another relation between a small pipe and a carefully prepared place. You see, over there, tobacco arrived near the end of the 16th century through Portuguese and other maritime contacts. And by 1613, the English merchant Richard Cox reported striking enthusiasm for smoking among men, women, and children at Hirado. His wording was an outsider's generalization, though it shows how quickly the practice had become visible. Japanese smokers paired kizami, which was tobacco shredded into hair-thin strands, with the small bowl of the kisaru. and that charge produced only a few draws, so smoking became a repeated sequence of filling, lighting, inhaling, and tapping out ash. And in that Japanese setting, the tobacco gathered the fire pot, ash receptacle, tobacco, pipes and tools into a portable furnishing. Some examples were simple wooden boxes. Others used lacquer, metal fittings, ceramic inserts, drawers, and elaborate decoration. Placed beside a guest, the tray marked a temporary area of permission on tatami or flooring. The host could create this smoking place inside an existing room. Placement opened the interval and removal closed it. Tea practice, households, ryokan, restaurants, tea houses, and pleasure districts adapted the tray to different forms of reception. Like other global settings, a traveler could bring a personal kaisaru and pouch while relying on the inn for fire and ash equipment. Prints of courtesans and geisha made the long pipe part of gesture, fashion, and commercial fantasy. Kabuki could turn it into a sign of swagger or threat. Personal sets joined the pipe to pouches, cases, netsuke, cords, lacquer, textiles, carving, and metalwork. After restrictions on wearing swords in the 19th century, some artisans redirected sword-fitting skills toward smoking accessories and other daily objects. But as you can imagine, fire here also remained a serious concern, especially in dense timber cities. So to counter that risk, the tobacco concentrated embers and ash in assigned containers, creating a material discipline for indoor smoking without removing the risk. Manufactured cigarettes later reduced the need for the pouch, pipe case, fine cut, fire pot, and ash tube. The smoker carried more of the system personally, while the room supplied less equipment. Java, too, followed a separate path. Tobacco was present in the Indonesian archipelago by the early 17th century and entered a social field already shaped by betel chewing, hospitality, containers, spitting, and gendered exchange. The move towards smoking varied by region, class, and gender. Kretek combined tobacco with cloves and other ingredients in a paper cigarette, whose burning cloves produced a characteristic crackle. Local histories usually trace the mixture to Haji Jamhari in Kudus during the 1880s. He is said to have used clove oil or clove-laced tobacco for chest discomfort before producing cigarettes for others. The story remains central to Kudus memory, though contemporary documentation is limited and its details vary. Early production depended on leaf and cloves being dried, cut, blended, moistened or sauced, portioned, rolled, and packed in households and small workshops. Nitisimaito expanded the trade during the early 20th century through his Baltiga enterprise. Its growth required farmers, clove traders, tobacco dealers, paper suppliers, blenders, rollers, packers, printers, agents, transporters, retailers, and consumers. And with that, production rooms were filled with tobacco dust, clove aroma, paper, sauce, baskets, tables, supervisors, and repetitive work. Later, firms recruited large numbers of women for hand-rolling and presented dexterity and patience as feminine qualities. The workforce had changed across periods and companies so that gendered arrangement should remain historical instead of timeless. The finished Kretek, nonetheless, required only a light and a place for ash. It moved easily through workshops, homes, streets, markets, coffee stalls, and warung. Now, a warung could be a small front room, roadside shelter, wooden kiosk, or counter attached to a home. Coffee, snacks, credit, news, and regular customers gave the stall a social life without formal membership. The familiar pairing of coffee and Kretek emerged through colonial economies, local brewing, urban stalls, and 20th century routines. Its meanings developed through particular places, trades, and routines. The crackle and aromatic smoke made the cigarette recognizable beyond the smoker's body. Those same qualities exposed sellers, workers, family members, and other customers without their choosing the smoke. The next part of this history moves into Europe, where smoke increasingly received named rooms, fixed doors, and more permanent architectural boundaries. Yet the deeper principle was already clear. A room of smoke could travel inside a hose, a pipe rack, a tray, or a packet, provided people knew where to place it and who was expected to serve. A London broadside, printed in 1674, described the coffee house before a customer even crossed the threshold. Gentry and tradesmen were welcome. A newcomer should take the next available seat, and rank should not displace the person already sitting there. Swearing carried a fine. The person who started a quarrel owed coffee to the offended company. Dice, cards, and large wagers were ruled out. The sheet was partly prescription and partly satire, so it cannot tell us how every coffee house behaved. But it does reveal the problem these rooms had to solve. See, strangers arrived with different occupations, accents, political loyalties, reputations, and expectations of deference. So, a commercial company needed a temporary fiction of equal seating. It also needed a proprietor, a counter, heat, cups, news, lights, and someone prepared to stop talk from becoming abuse. As such, tobacco entered this arrangement without receiving a room of its own. A pipe might be filled from a paper or box, borrowed, purchased, supplied with a drink, or lit from a candle. Passing a light opened a small exchange between strangers. Smoke crossed the table and made one customer's habit part of everyone else's air. The same pipe could invite conversation, occupy a pause, irritate a neighbor, or become a picture of stubborn argument. European public life soon offered several doors. Coffee houses concentrated news and commercial contacts. Alehouses joined drink to neighborhood familiarity and credit. Taverns added wine, food, lodging, and chambers that could be rented for private business. Parisian salons depended on invitation inside a household. Cafes sold temporary access to tables, reading, performance, observation, and talk. Spanish tertulias belonged to recurring circles that might meet in homes, cafes, shops, newspaper offices, or rented rooms. Casinos and circulos formalized company through subscriptions and rules. And although smoke didn't make these institutions equivalent, it exposed who controlled entry, time, service, manners, and the shared air. Pasqua Rosé's London coffee venture appeared near the Royal Exchange around 1652, though some details remain uncertain. The earliest structure may have been closer to a stall or shed than the paneled newsroom later imagination prefers. Its location, however, did the real work. Merchants, brokers, porters, clerks, sailors, lawyers, and messengers were already moving through Cornhill. And by 1663, authorities counted more than 80 coffee houses in London. Their growth brought opposition from tavern keepers, moral criticism, political suspicion, and a royal suppression order in 1675 that was withdrawn after protest. Now, a coffee house required little grand architecture. A sign, serving counter, tables, benches, fire, and vessels for boiling and pouring could establish the trade. The best houses stood near places customers already needed to visit, including the exchange, courts, theaters, docks, booksellers, markets, post routes, and coach stops. Their addresses entered advertisements and correspondence. A shipmaster without a permanent London office could collect letters at a known house. A broker could arrange several meetings in one place. Auction notices directed customers to proprietors holding inventories and further details. The customer bought coffee and gained a position inside an information network. Smoking fitted the waiting built into that system. A pipe occupied the hands while a newspaper arrived. A captain appeared, a price was confirmed, or a rumor was corrected. Clay pipes were cheap, common, and easily broken. One pipe recovered from a cesspit at the site of Tom's Coffee House in Wood Street dates to roughly 1720 to 1750. And although it cannot name its smoker, its context places the object within the waste stream of a known coffee house beside the ash, food remains, broken stems, and refuse that workers removed after public conversation ended. Printed essays turned these rooms into maps of manners. Joseph Addison and Richard Steele associated particular houses with literature, commerce, politics, and neighborhood company. Their ideal customer listened, avoided bluster, and contributed without controlling the table. A pipe could support that composure by creating a pause. It could expose bad manners just as easily when smoke was blown into another face, ash was scattered, or a slow bowl became an excuse to occupy a seat indefinitely. Actual coffee houses became specialized. Wills became associated with literary company. Jonathans and Garraways became linked to finance and auctions. Lloyd's gathered shipping intelligence and hosted sales, including an auction of captured ships and prize goods in January 1757. Public visibility gave private transactions witnesses. The same density of news attracted informers and government attention because patrons could compare official claims with letters, prices, and eyewitness reports. Women owned, managed, served in, and lived around these businesses, even when the public image remained strongly male. Mall King's Covent Garden establishment connected coffeehouse trade with theater, sex work, criminal slang, elite visitors, and female proprietorship. Her room sits far from the orderly fantasy of the 1674 broadside. Service held every version together. Someone fetched water, managed fires, prepared coffee, washed cups, trimmed candles, supplied pipes, collected papers, remembered debts, cleared spills, and judged when a quarrel threatened the room. Meanwhile, the counter carried practical authority because the person behind it knew who expected credit, who received letters, and who belonged to which circle. The customer experienced available time because another person maintained its sequence. Alehouses and taverns organized company through different payments. An alehouse might be a household with a public front room where neighbors, workers, travelers, and local officials met over beer and small purchases of tobacco. A tavern was more likely to sell wine, meals, lodging, stabling, and access to a separate chamber. A group could enter through the public room, hire privacy upstairs, and control the door for the duration of a meeting. And so, privacy was being rented by the hour before clubs attached it to membership. Paris developed another balance between display and access. Early cafes distinguished themselves from cabarets and inns through mirrors, lighting, counters, porcelain, silvered objects, and carefully arranged tables. A customer purchased brief participation in an interior that resembled elite refinement. Smoke supported that performance when it came through a fine snuff box or cigar. Communal pipes, ash, and odor could weaken the cafe's claim to polish. Mirrors multiplied the company and allowed customers to watch entrances and nearby tables. They also required repeated cleaning as smoke settled on reflective surfaces. Some cafes offered private cabinets for meetings, meals, gambling, or discreet company. The customer entered through a public commercial room and purchased a temporary layer of separation inside it. The establishment associated with Francesco Procopio de Coltelli opened in 1686 and later became known as the Café Procop. Its position near the Comédie Française linked coffee with writers, actors, lawyers, critics, and theater audiences. The original business closed during the 19th century, so present claims of uninterrupted operation should be treated cautiously. Its lasting importance, nevertheless, comes from the cultural memory attached to the address. A cafe sold entry. A salon depended on invitation. A salon formed inside a residence under the authority of a woman or household whose introductions, reputation, and recurring guest list defined the company. A newcomer entered through a relationship with the host. Someone who violated the expected tone could simply stop receiving invitations. Domestic architecture helped manage tobacco. Snuff might remain in the shared room while pipes or cigars moved toward a cabinet, antechamber, dining room, or garden. The hostess could influence literature, art, patronage, and conversation while remaining subject to legal, economic, and gender restrictions. Her authority depended on wealth, household staff, family standing, and networks unavailable to most women. The commercial cafe, on the other hand, offered another kind of access. Women appeared as proprietors, workers, performers, companions, and customers, though those roles carried different reputations and freedoms. And during the French Revolution, some cafes became prominent centers of political news and assembly, while many continued ordinary trade. A 1792 account described boulevard coffeehouses admitting women and men. And although mixed admission did not provide equal safety, authority, or freedom of speech, the proprietor still had to manage hostile newspapers, uniforms, factional loyalties, loud readings, police attention, and customers who occupied tables long after their cups were empty. Moving on to Spain, the word tertulia named a recurring company as much as a building. A literary or political circle could meet in a house, cafe, bookshop, pharmacy, theater foyer, newspaper office, or rented hall. Its identity traveled when the members changed address. A familiar cafe table could become an informal property claim through timing, seating, jokes, manuscripts, disputes, and the waiter's recognition. No deed assigned it, though newcomers could see that the circle had already taken possession. The waiter helped mediate access by anticipating orders, carrying messages, finding chairs, and recognizing the stranger waiting for a named person. During the 1860s, some progressive tertulias expanded into political organizations with dues, officers, regulations, lectures, committees, and larger premises. The Madrid tertulia reportedly grew beyond 500 members. Scale transformed conversation into administration. Spanish casinos carried that formalization further. They were civic and bourgeois associations offering reading rooms, libraries, games, lectures, balls, and political connections. Subscription separated members from passers-by. Internal rooms divided quiet reading from noisy games and opened selected events to invited women and families, while everyday governance remained male. Each arrangement gave someone a different authority over smoke. Then, across the Dutch Republic, tobacco was already ordinary in ships, homes, workshops, taverns, streets, and shops before coffeehouses gained prominence. You see, tobacconists created a public threshold where customers inspected leaf, compared pipes, and asked about strength, price, or origin. So, coffeehouses entered this existing urban field of maritime trade, guild life, printing, and political reputation. Hamburg's licensing records from the late 17th and early 18th centuries show proprietors presenting their houses as orderly and useful, while describing rivals as disorderly, partisan, foreign, or socially improper. Fashionable public companies still depended on citizenship, confession, household status, magistrates, and older systems of urban permission. And in German university towns, taverns supplied rooms that student associations temporarily treated as their own. The Kneipe organized songs, speeches, colors, ranks, drinking rules, and visiting members. Porcelain pipes carrying names, dates, shields, and dedications preserved affiliation after university life ended. The landlord supplied heat, furniture, drink, and cleaning, while the students imagined the gathering as self-governed. As for Vienna, that city made prolonged occupancy central to coffeehouse culture during the 19th century. The familiar story that begins with captured coffee after the Ottoman siege of 1683 is a durable legend, though coffee was known in Habsburg lands earlier and licensed premises developed through wider commercial processes. The mature Viennese coffeehouse allowed a customer to remain over newspapers, writing, chess, cards, billiards, conversation, a pipe, or a cigar. A wooden newspaper rack held a large sheet open and made temporary possession visible. A glass of water allowed the waiter to revisit the table, clear ash, acknowledge a regular, and extend service without forcing another purchase. The customer's freedom to hang around depended on labor calibrated to appear attentive and unobtrusive. And then you have Budapest, which developed a related cafe world under its own political, linguistic, and urban conditions. Hungarian tobacco gained a sharper national meaning through disputes over Austrian monopoly and tariff policy. During the Revolution of 1848, tobacco and smoking became everyday signs of resentment and sovereignty. The cigar joined agriculture, state revenue, consumer choice, and male political identity in one visible object. And inside the Hungarian Parliament building, which was completed during the 1890s, smoking was restricted in the debating chambers. However, adjoining corridors contained numbered brass cigar holders. So, a politician could leave an unfinished cigar in a recognized place, enter the chamber, and then return after a speech or division. Architecture managed the interruption. Formal remarks entered the record inside the chamber. Conversation continued around the cigar holders in a less documented political zone. The symbol also remained gendered. National fellowship through cigars and mustaches claimed broad male belonging, while women were often expected to tolerate the smoke, withdraw, or risk respectability by adopting the same emblem. Indeed, Europe's public smoking culture developed through negotiation. Each room admitted company through a different blend of payment, invitation, familiarity, reputation, or membership. But in the rooms ahead, membership, servants, furnishings, ventilation, and dedicated doors would make permission more explicit. Exclusion was preparing to acquire an architecture of its own. In around 1844, the French architect and set designer Léon Foucher drew a smoking room as an octagonal pavilion. Imagined Moorish filigree covered its walls and dome. Turkish-style settees ran beneath arched niches. A Gothic pipe stand occupied the center, and a small table waited at the edge. A reclining smoker almost disappeared among the patterns. A male servant standing beside him disappeared even more easily. The room presented tobacco as repose, cultivated taste, travel, and private withdrawal. The attendant revealed the work required to sustain that image. Foucher called the design a tabagie, or tobacco room. He placed it inside a fictitious country house filled with historical and geographic styles. The pavilion also performed a practical task, as it held pipes, cigars, embers, ash, odor, and male company away from other domestic activities. A door protected furnishings from some of the smell and protected the gathering from interruption. Chimneys, windows, tiled surfaces, high ceilings, cabinets, trays, bells, matches, service passages, and cleaning cloths completed the system. The room managed smoke by moving its inconvenience into a selected interior and into the hands of workers. The 19th century members' club added another kind of wall. Entry depended on sponsorship, subscriptions, ballots, dress, reputation, and the judgment of existing members. A guest entered through another man's standing. A waiter entered because service required him. Women, employees, racialized outsiders, and rejected candidates encountered different routes through the same building. The rules became familiar through repetition until privilege looked like ordinary etiquette. Clubs grew from several older forms, including tavern societies, political associations, dining groups, coffeehouse circles, military messes, and professional gatherings. Regular attendance came before the purpose-built clubhouse. A fixed meeting night, chairman, subscription, minute book, or membership list could slowly turn custom into an institution. During the 19th century, the Gentlemen's Club gathered dining, reading, correspondence, cards, bathing, sleeping, and smoking under one management. Members gained the comfort of a large household without opening their own homes to the full company. The porter recognized faces. Committees controlled finance and discipline. Waiters learned habits. Newspapers arrived on schedule. Rooms separated quiet reading, meals, billiards, correspondence, and smoke. At the Reform Club, entry began long before a candidate reached the door. Men were proposed, seconded, displayed for inspection, and subjected to a private ballot. A blackball could exclude a wealthy, educated, or politically connected candidate without requiring a public accusation. Reputation became collective property guarded through secrecy. The building translated that system into movement. A porter's lobby opened toward a central hall, while dining, reading, library, service, and smoking spaces occupied different positions. By 1887, the former library had become a large smoking room furnished with bookcases, busts, tables, lamps, and decorative ceiling work. A smaller smoking room offered another scale of company. Books and portraits helped tobacco appear thoughtful, respectable, and rooted in institutional memory. And besides smoking, these rooms saw men read, write letters, wait, watch one another, test alliances, trade gossip, and negotiate away from formal records. The House of Commons smoking room made that function especially clear. Its tiled surfaces, leather seats, stove, terrace access, and division bell created a retreat that remained tied to parliamentary business. The bell could empty the room and return members to a vote within minutes. Formal speeches entered the record inside the chamber. Conversation over cigars occupied a less visible political zone. At the Oriental Club in 1871, members authorized borrowing to build a new smoking room. A non-smoking member sought legal advice about the liability attached to the loan. The room still went ahead. That dispute exposes the machinery beneath apparent tradition. Comfort required a vote, finance, construction, management, and agreement about collective risk. Service made the result feel effortless. Porters screened arrivals, waiters carried drinks and matches, kitchen staff extended the meal, and cleaners entered after members left. Backstairs, basement passages, pantries, and service doors allowed workers to appear where needed without joining the company they sustained. A porter could control the threshold without enjoying the rights it protected. A waiter could know every member and belong to none of their conversations. Colonial clubs carried this structure into cities where British identity was performed through local land and labor. Verandas, dining rooms, bars, billiard rooms, lawns, libraries, and service quarters created social enclaves for officials, merchants, soldiers, and planters. Their boundaries varied. Some clubs enforced strict racial exclusion. Others admitted selected Indian elites, changed rules over time, or developed as mixed institutions. Calcutta contained several versions. The Bengal Club became a leading European institution. The India Club brought prominent Indian and European members together and received political visitors. There was also the Calcutta Club, which was founded in 1907. It presented itself as a mixed alternative. Mixed membership still left gendered and racial limits inside the building. Ladies' rooms, annexes, guest rules, and anxieties about contact between Indian men and white women redrew exclusion after the main threshold had been crossed. Indian cooks, bearers, khitmatgars, gardeners, guards, cleaners, and clerks made the club local, while members described it as a fragment of home. By the 1880s, dedicated smoking rooms had become familiar features of many large British houses. Earlier households used libraries, studies, halls, outbuildings, garden structures, or improvised corners. The specialized smoking room turned a household timetable into a floor plan. It often sat at an edge, in a tower, wing, upper floor, corridor, or garden front, away from bedrooms and principal drawing rooms. At Cardiff Castle, William Burgess completed the winter smoking room in 1874 for the 3rd Marquess of Bute. The room occupied the clock tower as part of a bachelor suite. A buffet stored cigars and alcohol, while stained glass, carved stone, painted ceilings, and gilding made withdrawal into a display of learning, lineage, and wealth. After dinner, men could leave the table for a room already supplied with tobacco, drink, fire, and seating. The usual explanation presented this movement as protection for women from smoke. The same door removed women from conversations about politics, business, money, sexual joking, and male alliances. So, as you can see, sensory protection and social exclusion operated together. Yet smoke still traveled through corridors, stairwells, fabrics, hair, clothing, and ventilation paths. Chimneys, windows, ceiling openings, fireplaces, flues, and high rooms could reduce haze or odor. They changed concentrations and redirected air. They never made exposure harmless, however, especially for workers who entered repeatedly to clean and serve. For that, materials answered the residue. Tile, polished wood, leather, metal, painted surfaces, and stone could be wiped. Curtains, carpets, and upholstery softened the room while absorbing smoke and ash. Cigar cabinets, pipe racks, cutters, match stands, ashtrays, coal scuttles, lamps, decanters, and bells arranged the act into a furnished sequence. And that sequence began before any guest arrived. Cigars were purchased, inspected, stored, and replenished. Pipes were cleaned, fires laid, lamps trimmed, glasses carried, and ash receptacles emptied. Burn marks, soot, spills, wax, and stale odor required even more attention. But again, housemaids cleaned grates, shook rugs, brushed carpets, dusted surfaces, and aired rooms. All the while, footmen carried coal, trays, drinks, lights, and messages. A bell made service feel immediate for the seated caller while increasing the distance traveled by the worker. Clothing extended the room onto the body. Smoking jackets and caps marked a temporary change from formal evening dress and absorbed some of the odor that might otherwise cling to it. Velvet, tassels, embroidery, and borrowed Turkish, Persian, Indian, Chinese, or Japanese motifs turned practical garments into displays of masculine leisure. Women's needlework could help create a costume for a room that excluded them. After all, Foucher's Pavilion, the Turkish smoking room at Victoria Mansion in Portland, Maine, and similar interiors assembled several cultures into European and American fantasies. These rooms turned selected surfaces into a story of empire, travel, and licensed idleness. The same cigar could confirm one person's authority and damage another person's reputation. A gentleman smoking after dinner occupied an authorized room. A servant smoking near the main entrance could be accused of insolence. A colonized subject holding a cigar might be mocked as imitative by Europeans who treated their own use of foreign objects as cosmopolitan taste. A woman with a cigarette could be described as theatrical, working class, bohemian, sexually available, foreign, or defiantly modern. Product, clothing, posture, companion, hour, and address worked together. Visual culture helped enforce the code. Punch's 1851 satire, A Quiet Smoke, imagined women in bloomers smoking inside a tobacconist's shop. The joke joined dress reform with the adoption of masculine habits. Such images show anxiety more clearly than prevalence. From the years 1880 to 1919, women smokers were socially present while remaining difficult to represent as respectable. The cigarette's small size and quick use made it easier to carry, conceal, extinguish, and photograph. It became associated with education, artistic life, emancipation, nightlife, and modernity, while older links with sexual reputation remained. Women smoked in bedrooms, boudoirs, studios, gardens, private sitting rooms, hotels, cafes, and selected club spaces. Some households gradually admitted women after dinner. Clubs answered with special days, separate dining areas, annexes, and limited guest rules. Access expanded through structures still controlled by male members. Race, religion, class, and sexuality produced other doors. Elite clubs could restrict Jewish membership through written rules, social networks, or secret ballots. For that reason, London's East End Jewish working men's clubs created alternative settings for lectures, reading, recreation, politics, welfare, and sociability. Some admitted women during periods when many comparable institutions did not. Their existence showed that exclusion could produce new institutions, though each new room still required money, rules, labor, and its own decisions about authority. Queer bars and clubs became more visible in several European cities during the early 20th century, especially during the 1920s. Parisian venues such as Le Monocle later appeared in Bressailles' photographs. Even Berlin supported bars, dance halls, associations, and guarded places of recognition before Nazi destruction. So, cigarettes appear throughout parts of this visual archive as elements of nightlife, fashion, anonymity, and shared transgression. A photograph may be staged, and a police record may distort the people it describes. Yet, the strongest claim remains spatial. A door could offer refuge while exposing the venue to raids, hostile newspapers, landlords, blackmailers, and surveillance. Staff could become protectors or informants. A porter recognized faces. A waiter understood couples and regular groups. A manager could warn patrons about police or hostile visitors. The same observational labor that protected exclusivity in an elite club could protect vulnerable company in another room. And as you can imagine, across clubs, households, offices, hotels, legislatures, and nightlife, permission followed control over time and space. A member could linger without explanation. An employee entered to carry, clean, repair, or summon, and could be punished for lingering. A senior man filled an office with smoke while clerks, cleaners, typists, and visitors endured the air. Respectability belonged most easily to the person who chose the room, the product, the hour, and the length of stay. Yet, The next major room would organize attention in a very different way. Beyond the club and country house stood the cigar factory, where workers would claim a shared voice inside production itself. At 11 on a July morning in Havana, Felicia Alejandra Torres Rodriguez touched a small bell inside the Partagas factory. The rollers removed their earphones, put away their telephones, and turned toward a modest lectern. Torres began with lines from a song by Eliseo Grenet. She would continue with news, practical notices, José Martí, Gabriel García Márquez, and questions gathered from the room. Production never stopped. Hands kept sorting, cutting, shaping, and finishing tobacco, while one voice gave the workday a shared center. The role of that voice is called lector de tabaquería, which is usually translated as factory reader. That simple name, however, hides a larger job. You see, the lector can be an announcer, performer, researcher, mediator, teacher, and keeper of a collective routine. The reader brings the printed page to people whose hands remain occupied with leaf. A galera, or the large production hall, made this possible. Rollers sat in repeated rows at connected work tables, using the chaveta, or a broad steel blade, to cut wrapper leaf, then shape the filler, then apply the binder, then roll the wrapper, then trim the cap before inspecting the surface. The work produced taps, scraping, footsteps, conversation, and moving leaf. Fortunately, it lacked the continuous mechanical noise found in many industrial workplaces. A raised tribuna carried the reader's voice above the benches and across the room. Heat, dust, fatigue, grading, rejected work, supervision, and production targets remained beneath the voice. The platform created a public inside those conditions. Hundreds could hear one newspaper report at the same time. A novel could unfold over several workdays. A question could become common knowledge before it was reduced to private conversation. Shared listening added pleasure, argument, political education, care, and solidarity to the factory clock. The origin is usually told as a clean anniversary, though the evidence is less tidy. A later tradition placed factory reading in Bejucal in 1864. The strongest surviving contemporary record points to El Figaro in Havana on December 21, 1865. Before that, cigar-making prisoners at Havana's arsenal had paid for short readings after work. Confinement gave the listeners little control over factory time. The decisive change came through tobacco workers and their own press. Saturnino Martinez, a roller at Partagas, helped establish La Aurora, a weekly newspaper dedicated to artisans. Its first issue appeared on October 22, 1865. The paper promoted worker education, libraries, schools, mutual aid, associations, literature, and labor discussion. At El Figaro, around 300 workers agreed to pay one colleague to stop rolling and read aloud. Each listener contributed toward the wage he lost. That arrangement made the audience the reader's employer. So, the factory gained a voice that did not begin in the owner's office. Partagas adopted reading on January 9, 1866. A young worker opened Las Luchas del Siglo by Manuel Fernández y González and read for half an hour. Another worker followed him, then another, creating a relay that lasted through the day. Jaime Partagas approved the practice and required prior approval of the texts. However, permission arrived with censorship. He also promised a central platform, inaugurated on February 3rd. Workers had initiated and financed the custom. The owner supplied space and furniture while keeping authority over content. But That tension remained inside the tribuna from the beginning, and by late May, readings had spread through major Havana factories and nearby towns. Smaller workshops sometimes pooled their money and shared one reader. A lector could stand on a box, move between rooms, or spend an hour in several factories before a permanent platform appeared. People also gathered outside open windows to catch the words from the street. The galera became a fragile broadcasting point long before microphones. As the custom settled, the rotating worker became a specialist chosen for projection, pronunciation, stamina, memory, and timing. News demanded speed and clarity. A serial novel required character, suspense, and enough restraint to keep delicate hands focused on the leaf. Listeners judged every rushed passage, omitted item, and mispronounced name. And at the end of the day, their approval gave the voice authority. Owners could value the lector as a productivity aid and fear the same voice as a political instrument. Ramon Ayones rejected a platform at his workshop, arguing that factories were for work and tribunes belonged in lyceums. His objection identified the problem clearly. The tribuna gave industrial labor the furniture of public speech. On May 14, 1866, Havana's political governor prohibited books and newspapers that distracted workers. A June circular attacked collective readings and discussions unrelated to the task. The authorities treated the workers' attention as property and the shared audience as a danger. Suppression changed the scale of reading without ending it. Newspapers moved in lower voices when supervisors were absent. Small groups gathered in corners or after meals. The text became easier to control once the audience had been broken apart. Platforms returned during looser periods, and many Havana factories restored them during the 1880s. By then, the lector had become a recognized occupation with wages, influence, and public standing. But then another ban in June 1896 turned censorship into a labor dispute. Readers petitioned, workers discussed a general strike. So, manufacturers, fearing disruption, supported a regulated restoration. Martín Morúa Delgado, an Afro-Cuban journalist, novelist, organizer, and lector at VRAVR, defended the practice and helped organize the readers. Morúa proposed rules that protected reading while accepting restrictions on material judged subversive. The outcome preserved the platform through compromise. The late colonial galera carried reformist papers, independence writing, labor journalism, secret publications, novels, poetry, history, science, and practical advice. José Martí's work reached tobacco workers as part of a national political project. Anarchist, socialist, liberal, religious, nationalist, and autonomist ideas circulated through the same wider field. The factory, after all, contained several political voices. Workers differed by race, legal status, occupation, skill, age, gender, belief, and immediate need. Shared attention created a common subject for disagreement. Literature, on the other hand, moved at a slower pace. Don Quixote, the Count of Monte Cristo, Les Miserables, and works from Spain and Latin America appear repeatedly in accounts of factory reading. Popular lore links Monte Cristo and Romeo y Julieta to books heard on cigar floors. Those stories are culturally credible, though the documentary chain behind a precise naming decision can be weak. The safer conclusion is that literature became familiar enough inside production to shape how brands later explained themselves. And at the end of the day, the chaveta gave the audience its own response. Workers struck the flat blade against the wooden board to signal approval during reader selections and other moments of recognition. Its sound could affirm the reader, while the sudden silence of tools could signal stoppage or strike. After 1959, nationalization reorganized factories, unions, management, exports, and official information. The lector survived inside a new state enterprise and union system. State newspapers and political material joined novels, practical notices, worker requests, celebrations, and condolences. So, the institutional setting changed around the surviving custom. Later, Cuba designated factory reading as National Cultural Heritage in 2012. Then, a national gathering in 2015 included 100 lectors, of which 72 were women, while a 2025 report described the practice in roughly 50 factories. Those figures measure different things, though they confirm a living network. Women now hold many reading positions in a workforce where their labor is central. Torres earned her post through a 21-day selection. Workers listened to competing candidates during 3 daily sessions and used their chavetas to signal approval. Modern committees filter novels and news within company, union, and state structures. Workers still judge the voice, suggest material, submit questions, and withdraw approval. Personal telephones, on the other hand, created a competing acoustic world. Each worker can carry private music, news, and entertainment. The bell briefly suspends those individual streams and restores a common audience. A recording cannot answer a question from the third row, explain a bus route, mark a birthday, acknowledge a death, or return the next day with a corrected answer. So, that responsiveness keeps the lector useful. The old Partagas building became Havana's most recognizable factory facade, though the famous building, the brand, the workforce, and continuous production follow different histories. Production moved in 2011 to a factory on Calle San Carlos after the Industria Street building deteriorated. And the retail room at the old site closed in 2020. A new La Casa del Habano, carrying the Partagas identity, opened on Bernaza Street in 2022 and reproduced parts of the remembered shop. The atmosphere survived through name and design after production and retail had left the original walls. Factory tours, hotels, cigar shops, museums, and heritage routes turned the lector into evidence of Cuban authenticity. Visitors may see genuine skill through a carefully controlled route. The tour can also hide quotas, shortages, rejected work, power cuts, wage disputes, and the parts of the building closed to outsiders. The next chapter follows cigar labor beyond Havana. Readers, rollers, newspapers, political ideas, and mutual aid traditions traveled with migrant communities into Key West, Ybor City, West Tampa, and other connected centers. There, factories became cultural rooms inside cities built around the cigar. In Ybor City, 25 cents could become a door. A cigar worker who paid that weekly amount into the Centro Español received no object to carry home. The money entered a collective account that could later provide injury or death benefits, social activities, and access to services arranged by the society. Now, although one small payment could do little by itself, when it became thousands of separate payments, repeated across years. This all became theaters, pharmacies, libraries, ballrooms, cantinas, classrooms, clinics, offices, and cemeteries. The ledger joined a worker's wage to a citywide system of care. That system began with the factory and reached far beyond it. A worker left a broad production floor and entered streets lined with rented casitas, boarding houses, groceries, cafes, bakeries, barbershops, newspapers, union rooms, and clubhouses. A theater performance could share a building with a medical consultation. A cemetery could carry the society's obligations beyond the member's life. The phrase Cigar City usually celebrates factories and production. The actual city was also built through migration, housing, transport, household work, racial boundaries, politics, illness, and recurring dues. Owners supplied capital, leaf, labels, buildings, and company housing. Skilled workers supplied the knowledge that gave the cigar its value. Families supplied meals, lodging, washing, childcare, and the daily work of settlement. Mutual aid societies and unions supplied forms of insurance and representation that employers and public authorities rarely offered on equal terms. Key West provided an earlier version of this world. After the Civil War, the island joined Cuban leaf, Cuban skilled labor, and United States tariff rules in one manufacturing center. Samuel Seidenberg established a major clear Havana operation there in 1867. Vicente Martinez Ibor opened his Key West factory in 1869. Clear Havana meant a cigar made in the United States from Cuban tobacco. The phrase described a commercial and customs category, while the labor and social life remained deeply connected to Cuba. Workers crossed the Florida Straits for wages, family, politics, factory demand, and the possibility of return. Steamships carried people, letters, newspapers, organizers, tools, and obligations between Havana and Key West. The short sea route made the island peripheral to the continental rail network and central to a Cuban social geography. Factories stood close to homes, boarding houses, docks, shops, and political rooms. A strike entered the household through missing wages. A factory fire altered rent and employment. A boarding house kitchen helped new arrivals enter the trade. Skilled workers also possessed mobility that employers found difficult to control. They could leave for Havana, New York, another Florida town, or a competing shop. However, strikes, fires, transport costs, and labor conflict during the 1880s encouraged manufacturers to seek another setting. So the factories could move only if the skilled workers moved with them. Tampa offered land, a port, civic promoters, and a railroad that reached the town in 1884. Eber acquired a tract northeast of Tampa in 1885. Gavino Gutierrez helped plan the factory and settlement. By the end of 1886, the Ybor and Haya factories were operating, worker houses were occupied, and businesses had opened around them. The factory itself organized light, air, material, and supervision. Long brick buildings commonly ran east to west, with rows of windows along the north and south sides. Packing and shipping occupied lower levels, cigar making took place above, and other floors could hold blending or storage. And when hundreds of workers left at a predictable hour, the streets responded. Grocers, cafes, bars, printers, landlords, tailors, shoemakers, and food sellers built their schedules around the factory clock. Seventh Avenue became a commercial spine. The casita placed a porch between household and street, while kitchens, yards, wells, privies, alleys, rent, laundry, and crowding supported the next workday. Women stripped stems, selected leaf, rolled and packed cigars, cleaned buildings, ran boarding houses, cooked for lodgers, organized relief, and sustained club events. Once their labor is restored, Cigar City extends from the workbench to the wash line and the school route. Cubans formed the largest early migrant group, joined by Spaniards, especially Asturians and Galicians, and by Sicilians, merchants, printers, shopkeepers, and other arrivals. Spanish often served as the district's daily language, while nationality, race, class, and political allegiance continued to divide the neighborhood. There were also Afro-Cubans who arrived with the same cigar skills, maritime routes, families, and commitments to Cuban independence as other Cuban migrants. However, Florida's color line excluded them from clubs, schools, housing opportunities, and public facilities, which were available exclusively to white Cubans. So, yeah, it's despicable. People could share a factory floor and remain barred from the same clubhouse. And we still see some of that racism and bigotry in today's cigar world, despite all the two-faced talk about brotherhood, fraternity, cigar families, and whatever other crap popular figures spew in front of the camera, only to return to their putrid nature once the cameras are off. But anyways, back then, West Tampa developed across the Hillsborough River after 1892, when Hugh McFarlane offered sites and incentives to cigar manufacturers. The A. Del Pino factory began production there that June. Ferries first made the crossing inconvenient, while bridges and streetcars later connected the district more closely to Ybor City. West Tampa incorporated in 1895 and remained a separate municipality until annexation in 1925. And so, the two districts belonged to one cigar economy while retaining different streets, institutions, loyalties, and local politics. Mutual aid converted personal risk into a scheduled collective obligation. Members paid while healthy and employed, so the society could arrange doctors, medicine, sickness support, burial aid, education, recreation, and buildings. The Centro Español was chartered in 1891 as Ybor City's first large ethnic mutual aid society. Its rules admitted people born in Spain and Cubans loyal to Spain. This was a political boundary while Cuba remained a colony. The weekly quarter bought social privileges and defined benefits. Its clubhouse gathered meetings, meals, performances, classes, reading, medical referrals, and informal company within one institution. The Centro Asturiano began in 1902 with 546 immigrants linked to Asturias and to an older society in Havana. It started in a small frame building, and in time, medical demand helped produce the first Covadonga Sanitarium in 1905, a major clubhouse in 1914, and a larger hospital in 1927. The society became insurer, cultural center, school, hospital sponsor, and custodian of the dead all at once. And not long after, El Círculo Cubano, or the Cuban Club, was founded in 1902. After its first clubhouse burned in 1916, members completed a 4-story yellow brick building in 1917. Its theater, pharmacy, library, ballroom, and cantina gave Cuban collective life the scale and appearance of a civic institution. L'Unione Italiana formed in 1894 with 127 members and joined sickness aid, family support, night school, lectures, culture, and burial. Its membership connected factory workers with grocers, farmers, merchants, and families whose strongest earlier identities might have been Sicilian, provincial, village-based, or familial. Afro-Cubans built La Union Martí Maceo because, as you already know, shared Cuban identity did not provide equal access to white Cuban institutions. An official meeting connected to the organization took place in October 1900 inside the home of Ruperto and Paulina Pedroso. Paulina was a cigar worker, organizer, and supporter of Cuban independence. Her household supplied political space before the society possessed a monumental clubhouse. A ladies' committee held its inaugural general meeting in August 1916. Women raised funds, organized events, cared for members, and turned unpaid community labor into offices, minutes, and decisions, even while the main boards remained gendered. But at the end of the day, by filling gaps left by discriminatory public systems, the societies could make municipal neglect easier to ignore. The cigar districts formed a communication circuit through ships, rail, mail, newspapers, handbills, speeches, factory readings, cafes, and club libraries. A text could be printed in one room, read aloud in another, debated at a table, repeated at home, and sent across the sea. José Martí visited Tampa in 1891 while building support for Cuban independence. He spoke near factories and at the Liceo Cubano, met organizers, and appealed to workers accustomed to collective contribution. Paulina and Ruperto Pedroso gave him care, security, and access to an existing Afro-Cuban political network. Workers turned parts of their wages into material support for the independence movement. The coalition still had to be rebuilt repeatedly among separatists, autonomists, annexationists, Spanish loyalists, anarchists, socialists, liberals, and people tired of politics. Labor organization, on the other hand, created another set of rooms. The Cigar Makers International Union defended skilled standards, union labels, benefits, and strikes, while other workers joined more militant or locally rooted groups. A union hall, nationalist club, mutual aid theater, newspaper office, and factory floor served different purposes, though one person might use all of them. However, the 1910 strike exposed the violence beneath Tampa's celebrated prosperity. Employers, officials, police, and vigilantes treated militant organizers as threats to civic order. Some were kidnapped and forcibly removed. The attack warned entire neighborhood networks that collective action could be answered beyond legal procedure. And in 1931, owners removed lectors during another major strike. The workers' defeat ended factory reading in many Tampa plants and weakened the link between print and collective discussion. Political life continued through unemployment groups, relief work, anti-fascism, unions, clubs, and neighborhood organizing. And in May 1937, Latina women marched in Ybor City under the influence of labor organizer Luisa Moreno. They used the street as a political room and linked workers' rights, anti-fascism, and civic participation. La Gazzetta carried another part of the factory's voice into print. Victoriano Manteiga, a former lector, founded the Tampa newspaper in 1922. It published in Spanish and later added English and Italian sections, preserving connections after mechanization and factory decline weakened the audience that had formed it. Industrial change eventually reduced the dense daily system that sustained factories, dues, clubs, and local newspapers. Mechanization reduced skilled handwork. The Great Depression weakened wages and subscriptions. After the Second World War, families moved beyond the old districts, and automobile travel loosened dependence on nearby streets. Urban renewal delivered a sharper break. Then, beginning in the 1960s, demolition cleared about 70 acres of Ybor City, including hundreds of houses, clubs, a fire station, and a cigar maker's school. Interstate construction divided the district. Major factories and ornate clubhouses survived more readily than boarding house kitchens, alleys, union offices, rented rooms, and Black Cuban meeting places. So, in the end, Cigar City was an ecology of work and mutual obligation. Its residents moved through it as producers, tenants, parents, patients, subscribers, voters, strikers, performers, mourners, and neighbors. The cigar created the economic concentration. Collective organization made that concentration socially habitable, though access remained divided by race, sex, nationality, class, craft, and political belief. And the next chapter follows this urban world into motion. Railways, steamships, barracks, hotels, and other transport systems would carry smokers and tobacco through spaces where time, class, fire, and permission had to be managed on the move. When Stanley G. Grizzle began work as a sleeping car porter on the Canadian Pacific Railway in 1940, the company gave passengers berths and gave him no protected bed. After making beds, carrying luggage, shining shoes, cleaning toilets, answering bells, and remaining available through the journey, he might claim a few hours on a seat in the men's smoking room. A mattress stored underneath could be spread across it. The air retained the day's cigarettes and cigars, and a passenger could enter at any moment. Pullman porters in the United States described a similar arrangement, sometimes separated from the washroom, spittoons, card games, and late-night smokers by little more than a curtain. The room was an amenity for the traveler, a service zone for the porter, and a makeshift bedroom only when nobody with a ticket wanted it. That contradiction defines mobile smoking space. A train, ship, barracks, or aircraft was a temporary institution whose occupants could not redesign the plan or step outside whenever the air became unpleasant. The operator chose the labels, classes, schedule, permitted conduct, and people assigned to maintain each zone. A compartment promised that smoke could be placed somewhere without becoming everyone's condition. Movement kept testing that promise. Doors opened, ash loosened, ventilation carried air, and staff crossed boundaries because service followed passengers. The longer the journey and the fewer the exits, the more power the operator's classification carried. Military tobacco began with supply. During the American Civil War, tobacco was absent from the standard Union subsistence ration. Soldiers bought it from sutlers, received it in parcels, found it locally, traded for it, or divided it among their companies. Confederate soldiers could possess tobacco while lacking coffee and other imported goods, which led to exchanges across lines and in prisons. A plug could be chewed, cut for a pipe, divided into smaller pieces, and carried more safely than a fragile cigarette. A cigar in an officer's portrait could suggest rank and composure, while a private's twist or improvised pipe belonged to another economy. All forms remained subject to command. However, canvas tents, wooden barracks, ammunition, forage, ships, and darkness made an ember a fire risk or a visible target. So smoking moved into dugouts, sheltered corners, kitchens, guardhouses, and pauses when danger appeared tolerable. And by the First World War, the manufactured cigarette suited the mass army unusually well. Packets were portable, countable, quick to distribute, and easy to use during a pause that an order, shell, whistle, or medical call might end without warning. And by the end of the war, cigarettes accounted for more than half of British tobacco consumption, while contemporary estimates described smoking among soldiers as nearly universal. Supply came through governments, canteens, families, newspapers, companies, clubs, and charitable smoking funds. An official issue classified tobacco like another necessity. A packet from home carried affection and imagined relief. At Le Havre in September 1914, one distribution supplied 10,000 cigarettes to wounded French and British soldiers. Princess Mary's Christmas gift fund placed cigarettes, tobacco, a pipe, and a lighter inside an embossed brass box for smokers, while non-smokers received writing materials. The alternative had to be designed around smoking as the default. Some men traded their cigarettes instead of using them, so even refusal did not remove anyone from the tobacco economy. Military language called tobacco comfort, cheer, nerve, companionship, and morale. Those words described real experiences while obscuring dependence that repeated supply could deepen. A soldier could feel relief during bombardment and feel withdrawal when the packet ran empty. Later, United States field rations continued to include small cigarette packs through much of the 20th century, finally removing them in the 1970s. Railways turned private smoke into a contract between strangers sharing a company-controlled enclosure. Great Western Railway rules prohibited smoking in carriages and stations in 1838. Demand did not disappear, so Parliament eventually turned the conflict into architecture. Section 20 of the Regulation of Railways Act of 1868 required covered British companies to provide smoking compartments for every passenger class unless an exemption applied. First, second, and third class were reproduced inside the smoking solution. The law offered formal accommodation without equal comfort. A padded first-class compartment and a crowded third-class carriage might carry the same label while differing in air volume, cleaning, privacy, upholstery, and service. The sign also carried gender. Railway custom often treated the smoking compartment as a place for gentlemen, while ladies-only cars promised protection from male strangers and smoke. So, a woman entering the smoking compartment could be judged even when her ticket permitted it. Crowding created another problem because a non-smoker might board the only compartment with room and remain trapped until the next station. Smoke escaped when doors opened and drafts moved through windows, vents, and gaps. American railways developed dedicated smoking cars, combined rooms, and compact smoking areas beside men's washrooms in sleeping cars. Pullman sold the train as a hotel on wheels, with spaces for sleep, dining, smoke, washing, and observation. That continuity depended heavily on black porters. They carried luggage, converted seats into berths, supplied water, brushed clothes, shined shoes, cleaned washrooms, emptied ashtrays and cuspidors, and answered calls through extreme working hours. Furthermore, passengers often called every porter George, which erased the worker's own identity. But then again, luxury was staged through racialized expectations of attentiveness, deference, and tirelessness. The hierarchy continued through segregated stations and Jim Crow travel. A black porter served white passengers inside a polished car, while black travelers faced discrimination in waiting rooms, tickets, dining, seating, and sleeping accommodations. And when the public performance ended, the smoking room exposed the labor arrangement. The company sold protected sleep to passengers while a porter tried to rest behind a curtain in the room he cleaned. Some porters traveled about 11,000 miles and worked roughly 400 road hours in a month to earn a basic wage that still depended heavily on tips. In 1925, A. Philip Randolph led the organization of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. The Pullman Company recognized the union in 1937 after a long struggle over wages, hours, discipline, expenses, and adequate rest. And as a result, the polished smoking compartment had become visible as a workplace. Now, unlike trains, ocean liners gave the compartment enough space to become a destination. Large ships separated passengers through decks, stairways, cabins, dining rooms, promenades, lounges, and ticket classes. A first-class smoking room could resemble a gentleman's club, complete with carved wood, heavy furniture, tables, lighting, drinks, newspapers, cards, and steward service. A photograph of the P&O liner Egypt in 1897 showed its new first-class room before passengers, ash and labor disturbed the arrangement. Similarly, the Empress of Asia, which was completed in 1913, carried a Jacobean smoking room on its promenade deck, joining modern propulsion and electric lighting to a staged English past. Then there was the Normandy. Introduced in 1935, This liner used Jean Dunan's monumental lacquered and gilded panels to place smoking inside a display of French art, technology, class, and national prestige. Overall, these rooms were usually imagined as male and belonged to the fair class that paid for them. Stewards supplied drinks, matches, cutters, ashtrays, newspapers, and cards, then cleared residue and restored the furniture. The passenger experienced a composed interior. The worker experienced the bars, pantries, stores, corridors, crew routes, and waste systems behind it. Walls, doors, distance, and room volume gave liner separation more physical support than a railway sign alone. Access remained unequal, smoke still traveled, and staff still crossed the boundary. Later on, commercial aircraft inherited the language of lounges and classes while steadily reducing the architecture. Some early services restricted cigars and pipes to a separate lounge. A Western Airlines brochure for the Douglas DC-6B used exactly that rule. And as cabins became denser, many airlines replaced the lounge with smoking and non-smoking rows divided by a movable sign or curtain. Ashtrays appeared in armrests. The airline could adjust the number of smoking seats according to bookings, though a flexible commercial boundary could not create a fixed atmosphere. Passengers and crew continued to share cabin air. Flight attendants moved through every row with meals, drinks, blankets, and other services. A passenger smoked for one journey. A crew member worked repeated sectors and absorbed the combined exposure of many passengers. But over time, research found leakage beyond designated rows, while airline and tobacco industry arguments about filtration and ventilation could not make the sections into separate air systems. Flight attendants and their unions helped change the dispute from passenger courtesy into occupational health. United States regulation developed in stages. First, the Civil Aeronautics Board required separation in 1973. Afterward, smoking was prohibited on domestic flights lasting 2 hours or less in 1988. Then, rules effective in 1990 made virtually all scheduled domestic passenger flights smoke-free, with limited transitional exceptions. But then, an amendment in the year 2000 extended the federal prohibition to covered scheduled international passenger services. However, the International Civil Aviation Organization had already adopted a resolution in 1992 seeking progressive restrictions and complete bans by July 1996, though implementation remained uneven. The weakness of the old boundary became painfully clear on an Olympic Airways flight in 1997. Dr. Abid Hansen, who had asthma and sensitivity to secondhand smoke, sat 3 rows ahead of the economy smoking section with no partition between them. His wife repeatedly asked that he be moved, empty seats were available, and the requests were refused. Hansen suffered respiratory distress and died during the journey. The United States Supreme Court later held that the unusual refusal to assist could qualify as an accident under the Warsaw Convention. The case did not claim that every exposure produced the same result. But it did show how little protection a non-smoking seat offered when the section shared the same air and service discretion failed. Aircraft ashtrays then acquired a different meaning. So, after smoking prohibition, lavatory ashtrays remained as safety equipment because an illegal smoker might otherwise discard a cigarette into something more dangerous. But enough of that for now. Inside the next chapter, hospitality businesses, casinos, sporting institutions, and specialist tobacconists would turn arrival into another system of rooms, service, access, and controlled smoke. On the 5th of April, 1892, a photographer from Bedford-Lemere entered the smoking room of Liverpool's Adelphi Hotel. The room was empty. A tiled fireplace stood beneath a framed mirror, upholstered chairs formed conversational groups, and small tables waited beside them. Gillow and Company, the decorators, had commissioned the photograph as a record of a finished interior. The camera preserved the furniture, joinery, fabric, and proportion while removing every person who made the room function. No waiter crossed the carpet. No cleaner gathered ash. No guest occupied a chair long enough to leave a mark. The image captured the central promise of commercial hospitality. A visitor entered a setting that appeared ready before arrival and remained ready after departure. Hotels, casinos, sporting venues, and tobacconists sold this prepared interval around tobacco. The customer paid for a chair, permission, storage, advice, lighting, shelter, service, and the freedom to remain after the immediate transaction had ended. Staff opened, cleaned, ventilated, stocked, polished, and arranged the space. Architecture, prices, dress, tipping, and worker guidance communicated the rules without presenting them as a complete code. The specialist door welcomed a paying stranger while deciding how that stranger should behave and who would perform the work around him. Grand hotels expanded the older inn into a chain of public rooms where guests could read, write, dine, drink, play billiards, receive grooming, and smoke without leaving the building. To give you examples, at London's Great Eastern Hotel, smoking rooms stood within a larger sequence of bars, reading rooms, writing rooms, a barber shop, and billiard rooms. Then there was Newcastle's Royal Station Hotel, which placed its smoking room beside billiards and a refreshment bar, reached by a marble stair. So the cigar became one stop in a commercial route. A guest could move from dinner to smoke, from smoke to billiards, and from billiards to another drink while the account remained open. Deep chairs slowed the body. Small tables placed drinks, matches, and ash within reach. Tile, leather, carved wood, and dark finishes projected durability while tolerating some evidence of use. The room seemed separate from the hotel, even as every object kept the customer inside its business. That appearance depended on divided circulation. Guests moved through lobbies, stairs, galleries, dining rooms, and named salons. Food, bottles, linen, fuel, messages, and waste traveled through pantries, cellars, backstairs, and service doors. Porters, waiters, bartenders, housemen, laundry workers, cleaners, and managers restored the public side while the hotel continued operating. One group could still be seated as staff prepared the room for another. Tobacco increased this imbalance. A guest could leave when the smoke became unpleasant. A worker assigned to the room had to return. Old smoke remained in curtains, upholstery, carpet, clothing, ash receptacles, and spittoons after the smoker stood up. In 1890's Chicago, hotel and restaurant workers formed a biracial culinary alliance and challenged employers within the growing world of corporate hospitality. The polished room that made a customer feel recognized could require the worker to hide fatigue, exposure, and anger. Menus and cigar lists added another layer of control. They organized names and prices before a waiter spoke, teaching the guest which distinctions the hotel considered suitable. A box could be carried to the table, opened, described, cut, lit, and charged to the room. House cigars extended the venue into a band, box, or memory that left with the customer. The hotel sold the setting around the cigar and then attached its name to the object. Casinos intensified the commercial value of staying. Gaming floors used circulation, lighting, drink service, food, and entertainment to hold attention across hours that blurred ordinary divisions between day and night. You see, smoking allowed a customer to remain at the table. Requiring that customer to leave could interrupt play and redirect spending, which helped casino operators seek exemptions as clean indoor air laws spread. New Jersey's Smoke-Free Air Act took effect in 2006 and protected most indoor workers while exempting casino gaming areas. Smoking remained permitted on 1/4 of the gaming floor, and solid barriers were unnecessary. The boundary existed on the plan more clearly than it existed in the air. And by April 2026, casino workers and public health advocates were still campaigning to remove the exemption. The dispute divided organized labor. Some dealers described smoke directed across gaming tables and demanded the protection available in other workplaces. Other unions and business groups feared that a ban could reduce revenue and employment. Workers facing the same regional economy measured danger through different forms of insecurity. But then research changed the debate from visible haze to bodily exposure. A National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health study examined dealers in 3 Las Vegas casinos before and after their shifts. Levels of NNAL, which was a marker connected to a tobacco-specific carcinogen, rose across an 8-hour shift. Air sampling also detected components of secondhand smoke. And although the study did not predict an exact illness for an individual worker, it showed that designated sections and ventilation had failed to prevent tobacco smoke constituents from reaching employees. But then, air systems could reduce odor, irritation, heat, and visible haze. Those improvements supported comfort and protected finishes. They could not, however, provide the protection created by a smoke-free workplace. So, at the end of the day, dealers, cocktail servers, security staff, and cleaners crossed gaming zones because their work required movement. The guest could leave the floor. But the worker's income required returning to it. Outdoor sport gave the cigar a slower clock and a wider field. A wooden cigar box held by the R&A World Golf Museum shows golfers with a caddy turning the course into a sales image of male leisure, status, and service. Although the object cannot establish how many golfers smoked or how early the practice began, it shows that tobacco sellers believed buyers would recognize the association. A golf round created repeated intervals of walking, waiting, choosing, watching, and moving again. The cigar could continue through those pauses and return with the player to the clubhouse veranda. The visual ease depended on caddies who carried clubs, found balls, read the ground, and kept play moving. Across the 20th century American South, black men and boys served white golfers at clubs that often excluded them from membership and competition. A player appeared unburdened because another person carried the weight. Black communities, nevertheless, created institutions beyond the white club gate. The Cheshire Country Club in Connecticut, for instance, was operating under black leadership by 1917, according to contemporary newspaper evidence recovered and publicized in 2026. Its facilities included a small golf course, tennis, a veranda, ballroom, billiard room, music, meals, and social events. A recorded smoker after a political speech placed cigars inside a black institution of fellowship and professional society. Shady Rest Golf and Country Club followed in New Jersey in 1921 and developed a longer, better documented golfing legacy. The newer Cheshire evidence changes a familiar priority claim without reducing Shady Rest's importance. Race meetings and country house sports organized leisure through other intervals. Spectators moved among enclosures, stands, bars, betting rings, and rails while grooms, stable workers, grounds crews, caterers, cleaners, beaters, keepers, drivers, and domestic staff prepared the event. The cigar looked solitary because surrounding labor had been made ordinary. A gate, ticket, membership list, land title, uniform, or service roll had already assigned each person's place before anyone lit it. And then there was the tobacconist. The tobacconist sold confidence with the product. Boxes, jars, pipes, cutters, cases, scales, catalogs, cabinets, and humidification equipment organized tobacco into visible categories. A chair changed the transaction by allowing the customer to remain. A clerk's questions about time, strength, size, storage, previous experience, and occasion narrowed the stock while teaching the customer which distinctions counted. Proper advice could prevent an unsuitable purchase, careless storage, a poor cut, or an uneven light. However, the same knowledge could become a gate. Regulars received recognition, credit, remembered preferences, private stock, conversation, and access to informal circles. A newcomer could be welcomed through a simple question or left feeling that vocabulary and status were entrance requirements. Historic businesses also turned age into authority, which requires careful chronology. Robert Louis traded on London's St. James's Street from 1787. And let's not forget James J. Fox, who began in Dublin in 1881, opened a London shop in 1947, and then acquired Robert Louis in 1992. Joining those dates into one uninterrupted Fox history would replace acquisition with false continuity. We also have PGC Hagenius, which began in Amsterdam in 1826 and entered its monumental Roken premises in 1914. Marble, wood paneling, chandeliers, glass displays, and a ceremonial sequence of rooms made retail design part of the merchant's authority. Chicago's Ewan Reese history began inside the Sherman House Hotel in 1857 under Edward Hoffman. Hospitality supplied passing guests. Specialist knowledge created a destination that could survive changes of name, ownership, address, and the hotel itself. Retail authority also carried colonial imagery. Cigar store figures depicting stereotyped indigenous people turned appropriation into signage and detached tobacco from living communities. Inside, the merchant presented origin and hierarchy as specialist knowledge, while the figure outside reduced indigenous history to costume and pose. Specialist communities could extend beyond the shop. Tom Dunn founded the Universal Coterie of Pipe Smokers in 1964 through letters and an irregular journal called the Pipe Smokers Ephemeris. The club required no shared building. Its host function traveled through correspondence, parcels, edited contributions, and remembered membership. There was also Hudson Bar and Books, which opened in Manhattan in 1991, later made shelves, low-light, drink, and cigars into a commercial reading room image. Some books could be read. Others helped the customer occupy the role of cultivated leisure without opening one. And in the end, commercial hospitality changed smoking by selling permission to remain in the establishment. And while this form of hospitality depended on making that preparation look permanent, the next chapter enters the modern cigar lounge itself. There, retail, cedar storage, lockers, air systems, membership, education, events, and digital communities would combine inside a room designed around the cigar from the beginning. In October 1996, the planned Grand Havana Room in New York was described through equipment. Its owners expected 1,000 individual humidors, a screening room, a conference room, and a communications room with fax machines and stock quote terminals. The club would occupy the former Top of the Sixes restaurant high above Fifth Avenue. A member could store cigars, eat, drink, watch a film, follow the market, conduct business, and remain within a single controlled interior. When the club opened in the spring of 1997, contemporary reporting described 800 lockers, a restaurant, a bar, and a screening room. The smaller count did little to change the idea. The modern cigar lounge joined storage, hospitality, information, entertainment, and recognition around a product that demanded time. A later corporate filing expressed the arrangement more plainly. Members paid initiation fees and monthly charges for private, shared, or corporate humidors, along with access to the lounge, food, drink, cigars, accessories, and guest privileges. The locker key opened a cedar-lined compartment and a recurring commercial relationship. The member owned the cigars. The club owned the system that stored them, received the member, and made returning feel expected. This combination defines the modern lounge more clearly than leather chairs or dark timber. Retail stock meets permission to smoke. Hospitality lengthens the visit. Storage creates a reason to return. Staff turn inventory into choices. Events make strangers arrive at the same hour. Membership turns familiarity into a paid arrangement. Digital systems carry the room into calendars, reservations, loyalty records, messages, and social feeds. The visible expansion began before the cigar boom had a settled name. Restaurants and retailers were organizing elaborate cigar dinners by about 1988. And by the early 1990s, hotels and restaurants in Los Angeles and New York were selling evenings that combined meals, alcohol, several cigars, demonstrations, gifts, and access to manufacturers. These dinners synchronized demand and taught a script for describing wrappers, strength, flavor, smoking time, and pairings. They also placed brands directly in front of a room of buyers. Education, pleasure, community, and promotion occupied the same table. Cigar Aficionado entered that world in the autumn of 1992. Its pages joined cigar ratings and industry reporting to celebrities, restaurants, travel, watches, spirits, golf, and an affluent idea of success. The magazine gave dispersed practices a national vocabulary and a visible map of places to visit. Government records show how rapidly the market changed. United States cigar consumption rose by almost half between 1993 and 1997, while large premium cigars grew far more sharply. Premium handmade imports climbed above 293 million in 1996 after hovering near 100 million early in the decade. Demand outran reliable supply, inflated orders encouraged weak new products, and the correction of 1998 and 1999 exposed businesses built on permanent shortage. The lounge survived because it attached experience to inventory. A tobacconist could recommend an alternative when a requested cigar was unavailable. A bar could continue earning while the cigar burned. A private club could collect dues during months when a member bought little tobacco. Club Macanudo made the branded model explicit when General Cigar began planning its Manhattan venue in 1995. It occupied the former Quo Vadis restaurant and combined cigars with food, drink, reservations, dress expectations, and private storage. The Grand Havana Room, as we mentioned earlier, used a more exclusive form with initiation fees, monthly dues, member guests, business facilities, and a glassed locker room that made belonging visible. These young businesses often borrowed the visual language of old clubs, libraries, hotel bars, and private studies. Low light, bottles, framed art, leather, and wood allowed a recently opened venue to look inherited. Nostalgia became the finish applied to a late 20th century operating model. The working lounge begins before the chair. It begins with the delivery route, the humidor door, the relation between intake and exhaust, the path used to clear glassware, and the distance between an ember and a combustible surface. The customer experiences a sequence. Entry establishes permission. A host or counter explains access. The humidor presents stock. The bar translates choice into service. Seating creates duration. Lockers, card tables, private rooms, terraces, screens, stages, and simulators divide different kinds of stay. Kitchens, storage, waste, toilets, and mechanical rooms support the visible field from its edges. The walk-in humidor is a room inside the room because cigars and people require different environments. Shelves may organize stock by maker, origin, size, price, or another house system. Glass turns inventory into theater, while solid walls can simplify light and climate control. Every opening of the door disturbs the microclimate, and every arriving box carries its own moisture history. Spanish cedar can be used for storage in shelves, dividers, drawers, and locker linings. On the other hand, cedar-colored decoration outside the humidor performs a different job, as it signals tradition without controlling a single cigar. As for the locker, it makes storage personal. A nameplate, key, code, or electronic credential turns membership into carpentry. The compartment holds boxes between visits, allows the venue to receive purchases, and gives staff a reason to learn the owner's collection and preferences. It also creates maintenance, billing, security, abandoned property, access, airflow, and emergency rules. Air management, however, carries the greatest consequence. Dedicated exhaust, makeup air, directional flow, pressure control, filtration, vestibules, and sealed boundaries can reduce haze, odor, irritation, and migration into adjoining spaces. Yet they cannot make indoor cigar smoke harmless. The American Society of Heating, Refrigerating, and Air Conditioning Engineers stated in 2023 that ventilation and air cleaning cannot eliminate environmental tobacco smoke exposure where smoking is allowed. Isolation can protect adjoining spaces more effectively when barriers, exhaust, and pressure relationships work as designed. Still, risk remains inside the smoking room, especially for workers who stay through repeated customers and long shifts. The system also creates work through filters, grills, sensors, fans, doors, residue, drafts, and maintenance schedules. And at the end of the day, the calm atmosphere is the final effect of labor that the customer rarely sees. Membership begins with a promise that the next visit will differ from an ordinary purchase. The benefit may be a locker, reduced entry fees, priority booking, discounts, guest privileges, private rooms, events, extended hours, or the assurance of a familiar seat and familiar company. Some lounges remain public and reserve selected benefits for members. Others require sponsorship and restrict the entire premises. Iron Oak Cigar Lounge in North Carolina showed a broad ladder when it opened in 2026. A low day pass price gave non-members a legitimate route inside, while monthly tiers added lockers, simulator access, and other benefits. Beginner sessions and tastings converted uncertainty into a scheduled reason to enter. Education works best when staff ask about time, strength, previous experience, and price before testing the customer's vocabulary. Construction, size, maker, and origin can be explained as facts. Strength, aroma, flavor, and pairing remain partly personal. A good host distinguishes evidence, house preference, and sales opinion. Brand representatives can explain factories, blends, leaves, and release plans while representing the company selling the cigar. Brand nights therefore combine real learning with promotion, data collection, raffles, discounts, and concentrated sales. Events also solve a social problem. A newcomer entering alone may hesitate before an established table. A tasting, class, game night, performance, or manufacturer visit supplies a common subject and a shared beginning. Repeated low-stakes recognition then creates belonging. A host remembers a name. A regular makes room. A beginner returns with an opinion about last week's recommendation. A birthday appears on the calendar and an absent member is noticed. The same familiarity can harden into gatekeeping when regulars claim preferred seats, control conversation, or receive forgiveness denied to newcomers. Tiered dues can make hierarchy visible through doors, nameplates, event priority, and staff attention. A successful lounge protects continuity without allowing members to treat shared commercial space as personal property. But yeah, digital discovery changed the game. Search engines, maps, photographs, review sites, social platforms, event calendars, and reservation pages allow a customer to inspect prices, decor, dress, programming, and clientele before arriving. The door can now begin as a form. A booking page may state age, guest, minimum spend, outside cigar, dress, deposit, and time limit rules. Clear information, after all, reduces embarrassment. Heavy or stiff rules can make a casual visit feel like an application, especially with the silly dress codes and whatnot. But on the bright side, member software can combine billing, check-in, reservations, loyalty, stock, events, messages, and access credentials. At the same time, the old locker key can become a phone credential. The older host's memory can become a database recording visits, purchases, preferred seats, membership tier, and spending. So, these records can improve service while turning recognition into surveillance and automated attention toward the most valuable customer. The pandemic made the separation between cigars and rooms unmistakable. During 2020, shops closed or reduced capacity, moved to collection and online sales, mailed tasting packs, and hosted video gatherings. Some manufacturers worked through local retailers so that virtual events preserved a host, a shared hour, product discussion, and part of the local transaction. So, although the virtual lounge could cross distance and survive after the scheduled session through recorded material, it could not reproduce the humidor, service, furniture, shared air, spontaneous table changes, or the possibility that a stranger might become familiar. That distinction clarified the lounge's actual product. Cigars can be purchased elsewhere. The room sells permission, immediate use, guidance, company, storage, hospitality, recognition, and the expectation of another visit. The member may begin to call it my lounge, even though someone else owns, staffs, cleans, regulates, and maintains it. At the end of the day, the modern cigar lounge works when stock, air, service, rules, membership, technology, and human recognition feel like one place. Its success never removes the questions surrounding it. And with that said, now, the final chapter enters the contested room. Law, exemptions, worker exposure, engineering claims, terraces, Gulf Arab hospitality, changing demographics, and new technologies will decide where this model can operate, whom it welcomes, and how it defends its legitimacy. In England, one door can change the legal character of an entire room. You see, a specialist tobacconist's sampling room must be enclosed, marked, separately ventilated from smoke-free parts of the premises, and fitted with a door that closes by itself. Even then, the exception applies only while customers sample cigars or pipe tobacco. The chairs and humidor may resemble a lounge. The law sees a shop performing a narrowly defined retail act under specific physical conditions. Walls, hinges, ducts, signs, stock, and customer behavior therefore work together as one legal machine. However, a failed door, shared ventilation, expired registration, or activity beyond the exception can change the permission while every piece of furniture remains in place. The worker, on the other hand, encounters another version of the same room. A customer may remain for an hour and leave. A tobacconist, waiter, cleaner, casino dealer, security officer, engineer, or airport attendant returns through the boundary across repeated shifts. Choice carries a different meaning when exposure is tied to wages, scheduling, promotion, tips, immigration status, or fear of unemployment. At the same time, the World Health Organization's guidance for Article 8 of the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control begins from a clear standard. Effective protection requires the elimination of smoking and tobacco smoke from indoor workplaces and public spaces. Ventilation, filtration, and designated areas may manage smoke as an operational problem, yet they do not provide the protection created by a fully smoke-free environment. The surviving specialist room exists inside the distance between that principle and the exceptions societies continue to authorize. Smoke-free law appears simple until its definitions begin dividing the building. A private club may occupy one category. A casino gaming floor may occupy another. A tobacco shop may permit sampling. A cigar bar may qualify through a founding date, alcohol license, age restriction, or revenue test. The state of New Jersey, for instance, protects cigar bars and lounges that occupied their premises by the end of 2004. They must renew their registration and show that at least 15% of annual gross income came from on-site tobacco sales and humidor rentals. A room inside an otherwise smoke-free establishment must use solid separation and exhaust that avoids recirculating smoke into protected space. Assembly Bill 1036 proposed allowing municipalities to authorize new lounges in January 2026. By mid-July, it remained a committee proposal, so the grandfather rules still governed the existing system. North Carolina, however, uses a different route. Its law exempts cigar bars that meet product revenue, alcohol, age, and smoke migration conditions. A 2024 amendment expanded where some bars could operate while retaining the wider indoor prohibition. England attaches permission to specialist retail sampling. The same leather chair can carry very different rights depending on the jurisdiction beneath it. The English exception now exists beside a much larger generational change. The Tobacco and Vapes Act received royal assent on the 29th of April, 2026. Its age of sale policy will prevent people born on or after the 1st of January, 2009, from ever legally being sold tobacco once the provision takes effect. So, a sampling room may remain available to eligible adults for years while its potential customer base declines through birth date. As such, the smoking room survives in the present as national policy reshapes its future. Legal classification still leaves the hardest question unanswered. Atlantic City makes that conflict visible across a much larger floor. New Jersey's smoke-free law protects most indoor workers while allowing smoking on part of the casino gaming area. The boundary may appear on a plan without becoming a sealed division in the air. Dealers and nearby staff remain at tables while customers come and go. Casino employees against smoking's effects and the United Auto Workers challenged the exception in court. A trial judge dismissed the case in 2024. Then, in January 2026, an appellate court revived part of the dispute and returned issues for further proceedings. So the central constitutional question remained unresolved by mid-year, while workers were also divided over the proposed solution. Supporters of a ban described repeated exposure and unequal protection. Unite here. Local 54 warned that an immediate ban could threaten revenue and employment. One group feared the health cost of staying. Another feared the economic cost of changing the business model. Both forms of insecurity belong to the same workplace. Enclosed gaming rooms with separate ventilation and volunteer staff have been offered as a compromise. At the same time, the word volunteer needs careful examination. The most profitable tables may sit inside the smoking room. A new employee may accept assignments that senior workers avoid. Tips, insurance, scheduling, and limited alternatives can turn formal consent into economic pressure. A defensible room would disclose who works inside it, which assignments can be declined, how complaints travel, when filters are changed, and what happens after an air system failure. So these measures reveal the labor bargain that customer privilege usually hides. Across the Arab Gulf region, cigar lounges share climate pressure, international aviation, imported stock, and luxury hospitality. However, they do not form one regional system. Now, besides imposing tobacco taxes of at least 100%, Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, and Oman differ in their tobacco laws, alcohol regulations, licensing systems, enforcement practices, tourism sectors, and forms of public sociability. The familiar photograph of leather, timber, shelves, and skyline removes the infrastructure around the room. Air conditioning shapes the hospitality calendar. Imported cigars require regulated transport, trained receiving, stable storage, and protection from heat and sudden humidity. Changes. Staff may work through several employers, contracts, sponsorship arrangements, and housing systems. A customer sees one service team while the room depends on hosts, bartenders, cooks, cleaners, engineers, contractors, security staff, and importers. It's not unusual to see upscale cigar lounges at a Four Seasons hotel offering terraces, evening service, small plates, and mocktails. The model shows how premium cigar hospitality can organize pace and status without relying on alcoholic spirits. Plus, the terrace helps during suitable weather, while summer heat, dust, humidity, wind, and cooling needs complicate any simple move outdoors. Dubai's Address Creek Harbor joins indoor seating to a broad terrace at the edge of a restaurant. The venue can change with weather and guest preference, though doors, air pressure, staff movement, and temporary enclosure determine how separate the two spaces remain. At the Chedi Al Bait in Sharjah, a cigar room occupies a restored heritage house and uses the language of the Majlis. The historic building, hotel conversion, imported cigar service, and current guest market belong to different histories that meet in one managed interior. Qatar places another contrast inside the same travel economy. The Chedi Qatara presents a hotel lounge beside the lobby. Hamad International Airport declares the wider terminals smoke-free while directing passengers to marked smoking rooms in concourses A through E. The airport gains control over where smoking occurs inside the secure zone. Similarly, Bahrain maps designated areas near departure gates, while Oman permits compliant smoking rooms in certain hotels and restaurants while keeping institutions such as schools, health facilities, government departments, and places of worship fully smoke-free. The Chedi Muscat's Puro Lounge combines hotel access, membership, food, a poolside location, and proximity to the coast. And then you have Saudi Arabia's expanding luxury hospitality market, which may create further demand. However, rapidly changing openings, licenses, and enforcement make any single Saudi model premature. Istanbul Airport offers a useful comparison beyond the Gulf region. Its smoking terraces and balconies rely more heavily on open-air edges, while Doha relies on enclosed extraction. The future is likely to divide into several paths at once. Some indoor rooms will survive through grandfather dates, specialist status, annual registration, revenue tests, age controls, and local approval. Scarcity may raise dues and prices, creating smaller rooms for wealthier regulars. Luxury can finance compliance. Yet, it cannot purchase ethical immunity. Other venues will move toward terraces, roofs, gardens, courtyards, and seasonal edges. Outdoor space can reduce accumulation compared with a closed interior. Its performance depends on wind, crowding, distance from doors, the number of burning products, and the degree of enclosure. Roofs, screens, retractable glazing, heaters, cooling systems, and walls make service more comfortable while bringing the terrace closer to indoor conditions. The Council of the European Union's recommendation adopted in December 2024 encouraged stronger protection in selected outdoor hospitality and transport areas. It created policy direction instead of an automatic Europe-wide ban. As such, the terrace has become the next disputed boundary. Technology will make rooms easier to observe. Particulate sensors, pressure monitors, filter alarms, door counters, booking systems, and maintenance logs can reveal peak occupancy, equipment failure, and smoke migration. A sensor measures selected pollutants at a particular location. Yet, it cannot represent every hazardous constituent or every worker's breathing zone. Technology can document and manage a system, but it cannot repeal toxicology. Digital systems also move the threshold beyond the building. Reservations, age checks, member databases, event listings, payments, and locker records determine access before the guest arrives. They can demonstrate compliance and coordinate community. They can also expose activity beyond a narrow license, record intimate patterns of attendance and spending, and turn recognition into surveillance. Demography will shape the lounge as strongly as engineering. United States data for 2021 estimated about 8.6 million current adult cigar smokers and showed much higher reported use among men than women. Survey categories combine different cigar products, so those figures cannot predict premium lounge membership with precision. They still challenge the assumption that an established male clientele will replace itself forever. Women-led groups such as the Broadleaf Broads and the Women's International Cigar Club have built networks around education, access, and fellowship. A broader clientele can change programming, furniture, staff composition, dress language, and the handling of harassment. So, social inclusion and health remain separate questions. A room may become more welcoming while remaining contested as a workplace. Heritage, on the other hand, will become another defense as legal customer pools age. A lounge can preserve retail expertise, architecture, craft knowledge, objects, and social memory. Preservation does not require unrestricted indoor combustion. Education can take place in a smoke-free room with legal consumption directed to a compliant setting. Other rooms will close when an exemption ends, a lease changes, an insurer objects, or a hotel adopts a stronger policy than local law. Communities may migrate to terraces, homes, events, travel, and digital groups. That movement can protect workers while reducing access for newcomers who once entered through an open retail door. And at the end of the day, the social consequence deserves recognition. It cannot justify transferring exposure onto employees. The most credible surviving model will be the honest room. It will describe extraction, pressure, filtration, and sensors as controls for movement, odor, visibility, and operation. It will avoid language claiming purified, medical grade, or hospital-quality safety. It will publish clear access rules and accurate legal categories. It will make maintenance and worker assignments visible. Staff will receive information about exposure and genuine routes to decline smoking area work without losing income or advancement. Complaints will move beyond the immediate supervisor. Independent assessment will remain available to workers and regulators. However, these conditions still fall short of the World Health Organization's smoke-free standard. Their purpose is to expose the terms of an exception while that exception continues. And as we reach the end of this dear episode, remember how we began beneath a floor, where tobacco entered social space through preparation, placement, authority, and protocol. And now we end at a self-closing door whose meaning depends on law, labor, engineering, business, and public consent. The rooms between those points never formed one uninterrupted tradition. Across different societies and centuries, people repeatedly arranged bodies, objects, time, access, and service around tobacco. Every arrangement answered the same practical questions in its own language. Who may enter? Who prepares the object? Who controls the flame? Who pays? Who serves? Who breathes the air? Who can leave? A room of smoke survives only while its answers remain defensible. When they cease to be, the permission changes, the door closes, and social life finds another place.